Can everybody find the chat?
It's possible everyone's engaging in self-reflection right now, wondering what they're doing here.
Yeah. That was a pretty existential question, I guess. Why are you here? All right, Oliver, trying to start a commercial hemp farm. All right, pioneer in hemp for Texas. Good deal. Irfan, I'm going to trying to get it so that I don't know if you can share your screen.
Apparently I can. Should I start that right now?
If you want to, just to get it set up.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Great, there we go. All right, Carol Wood loves to gardener, master gardener. That's great. Glad you're here, Carol. Okay. Well, y'all could feel free to send us chats. I'll try to moderate the chat box. If you have questions, I can save those and try to ask Irfan at the end. And this is a CEU hour, and so you'll be getting one CEU for IPM, which is always a good one to get. And I'll introduce our speaker this morning. Our first one will be Irfan Buffet. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Okay.
Yeah, VAFI, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And Irfan, I think you graduated with your doctorate this year.
I just,
is that right?
yeah, I just graduated with my doctorate. That's right. Yeah, in
Okay.
December.
All right. So Dr. Irfan, great. So he'll be speaking today about vegetable production IPM, and then we'll have Larry Stein speaking about fertility, and then Blake Bennett will join us later this morning to talk about the marketing and economics part of this. So we've got a really good lineup of speakers. I'm glad you're all here for this. I've been excited to hear it, and we'll get started. Again, hop in on the chat if you have questions, and we'll do some of that at the end. We'll send you your CEU later. And oh, one last thing before we get started, I do want to thank our committee. There's a horticulture planning committee that helped put this together. So Ray Mearshon, Joe Price, Louis McDaniel. There's Louis, I think. Maybe heard somebody. So these guys have helped us to pick the topics. Things, a lot of them are growers. These are things that were relevant to them and interesting. So with that, I'll introduce Irfan. He's a program specialist in IPM for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension in Overton at the Research Center there out in East Texas. And he's got a background in entomology, biological control, and experience in farming. I always learn a lot from Irfan. So we're glad you're here today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction. I hope everyone had a happy and safe New Year and holidays. So yeah, let's get right into it. You know, this is, as I understand, I think there's a lot of people that are just starting to get into farming or just starting to gain some experience or want to broaden their horizons a little bit on the pest management side of things. So this is almost a introduction in a sense, and going to cover some of the main culprits you may face. But as you probably are already aware, the types of species you may encounter, the pests you may encounter are vast. There are many different species. There's no way to cover them all, how to best manage them all in all different situations. So I hope to be able to equip you with some basic tools on recognition, monitoring and management as we kind of go through, and just some of the foundation of integrated pest management. I do also apologize for the periodic clearing of my throat. I have a slight sore throat today, so I apologize. I know it's never pleasant hearing someone clear the throat in the mic, so I'll try and step away when I do that. So starting off, if there's one thing I want you to take away today is that human agriculture is in constant battle with many aliens. All right, insects are tiny little aliens. They're all very science fiction-y. All right, there's a lot of science fiction movies that are kind of based on some of the life cycles of some of these insects, as we'll see a little bit later. So here, for example, is a water scorpion that is trying to pry open its its hands here for a nice photo shoot. As you can see, it grabbed my needle, presumably to use it as a weapon against me later that day. We also have periodically, I get people, periodically, quite often people send pictures of to identify things. And sometimes people will say it's a little particle of dirt that they see moving around on the ground. And that's one of two things. Either one, it might be this lacewing larva. So this lacewing larva basically puts debris on its back and the carcasses of its past meals on its back as a way to protect and or hide itself, like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Cool.
Or alternatively, it might be that you're losing your mind. So if it's the second one, that is usually a little bit more concerning, because the first one is a predator of other soft-bodied insects. So it's beneficial to have around. We also have very unique ways of transformation in insects, right? We have this metamorphosis where insects go from one form to a completely different form. And in this case, we have things that are doing what's called gradual metamorphosis. They're gradually changing, but since they have a exoskeleton, they have a hard skeleton on the outside, they can't just grow gradually. They actually need to shed off their outside skin, including all of the lining of their lungs. So this string that you see right here is actually the lining of the trachea. And it's going to shed that off. It's going to be a little bit soft and pliable. It's going to be able to kind of grow a little bit and then harden the outer skeleton again. And here it looks like a kind of like a freak mad scientist experiment. It's actually a mole cricket. It looks like a mole's front paws essentially, and the rest of the body looks like a cricket. And it does cause very similar damage to a mole. You'll actually see this little trenches kind of formed in the turf. And they are predaceous, so it's actually fed on this caterpillar in the background and then come to the foreground for a nice little photo shoot. So as you can see, just a quick idea, right? Again, just that kind of demonstrating that these are mini aliens that are occurring in your yards outdoors all the time, sometimes actually quite often even indoors. But now to give a little bit of context, integrated pest management, what is it and why do we use it? So going back just a few generations, we used to be hunters and gatherers. And all of a sudden we discovered, hey, you know what? We don't have to hunt and or gather. We can actually plant things where we like to. We can cultivate and we can actually domesticate animals, right? And with that allowed us to increase our yields. It allowed us to select things that we thought were more delicious. So it is thought that over these several generations, these hundreds and thousands of years, that humans have been selecting for plants that, say, for example, corn. All right, it's thought that natural corn is this tiny little thing that has 5 to 10 very hard kernels. You peel it by hammering with a hard object. Whereas now you have something that can be steam cooked and easy to peel and quite sweet. We also look at something like watermelon. All right, open with a hard hammer-like object or a sharp object, extremely bitter, and 18 seeds, very rich in fat. Whereas now we have this watermelon that's so juicy that if you accidentally drop it, it's going to bust open everywhere. Now, in this process of selecting for what we find delicious, we have also in many ways inadvertently selected for plants that are more delicious for pests, right? Or that have decreased defenses against pests. So as a result, they are now, domestic plants in many ways rely on our protection from some of the pests that they were naturally at one point resistant to. We also have, we start to learn kind of what's important in cultivating plants, from irrigation to crop rotation and fertilizer in forms of this little poop, until eventually, the fecal matter, that fertilizer was kind of a limiting factor until we had the Haber-Bosch process, in which we could synthesize nitrogen and these fertilizers. So now we could all of a sudden greatly increase our yields. Then we have the Green Revolution in the 40s and 60s, which is said to have saved 1 billion people from starvation. All right, and this is Norman Borlaug. Dr. Norman Borlaug is said to be the father of this of this revolution. He was an Aggie, and that's why still you go to some of these countries that were affected by the Green Revolution, they have so much respect for Aggies because of Dr. Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution. But he came up with these high-yielding varieties of cereal grains, expansion of irrigation infrastructure, help with modernization of management techniques, and distribution of hybridized seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides to farmers. So it went to from the situation of small acreage farming, which can, obviously can work very effectively. But when you're talking about food security, if all of a sudden there is a major climatic event or some kind of unanticipated events that may occur, if there isn't a good reserve of food or good ways of dealing with that, you can all of a sudden have huge food shortages. So all of a sudden we got to the situation from small acreage to things like this, large monocrops, which, as you can imagine, is ideal for pests, right? So we have created a situation where it's like a massive field of just pizza, right? So like all the kids are going to come eat it, right? Not the predators of the kids. And so, this is an ideal habitat for herbivores. And it's not until herbivores really establish until you're going to start to get some predators to start to move in. On top of that, we start getting globalization. We have shipping containers moving around the world. Each second here represents 8 hours of things moving around the planet. And with those are plants, and with those plants are insects. And that's how we get invasive insects, right? This murder hornet came on a shipping container off the West Coast. We're talking about things like spotted winged Drosophila, brown marmorated stink bug that may impact fruit and vegetable growers that, again, also came in on shipping containers. And they are particularly problematic when they establish because usually their natural predators are not around, and there may be some untapped resource that they can take advantage of that wasn't being taken advantage of before. So they can cause huge economic impact. And right now in the US, this is the full record of the number of invasive species we have. This is on the final test. So please make sure to take notes on this one right here. Write all those down. I could slow it down if we need to slow it down a little bit. That would help anyone. All right, so there's over 502 records with billions of dollars of economic impact. And I say billions as a very conservative estimate because in 2008 alone, this one fly, a spotted winged Drosophila, came in through West Coast, through California, which affects any soft-bodied fruit. And it caused $500 million worth of damage just in 1 year. So again, huge economic impact. On top of that, a lot of times when we're planting or cultivating the landscape, we're not always thinking about pest control services or how to attract predators. We're maybe thinking of aesthetics and how things may work better aesthetically in the landscape. But that's okay because we solved this, right? We all know that this was resolved with DDT, right? Like just fumigate our beaches, fumigate our kids. And it says, powerful insecticide, harmless to humans. And in its defense, DDT was relatively harmless to people. Okay, it didn't have a huge impact on human health, but it killed pretty much everything else. So it was horrible for fish, horrible for birds. And what happened was by spraying it over and over and over again, all of a sudden, we realized that you can get insects becoming resistant to these things. So the initial target, mosquito, all of a sudden was resistant to this insecticide. So this is when we started learning a lot about environmental toxicology, insecticide resistance, and so on and so forth. So we had Rachel Carson written this book called Silent Spring, in which she writes one famous quote as, "Why should we tolerate a diet of weak poisons, a home and insipid surroundings, a circle of acquaintances who are not quite our enemies, the noise of motors with just enough relief to prevent insanity? Who would want to live in a world which is just not quite fatal?" So fair enough. So Rachel Carson had a very good point here. And so in the 1970s, the USDA created this nationwide IPM program in the land-grant universities. So with Texas being Texas A&M University, basically. And that's what my role is, essentially for helping with education and training related to integrated pest management of pests as it pertains to growers. So what are some of the goals of integrated pest management? So you're probably familiar with organic, right? Some of you are maybe even trying to be organic. And then there's what's referred to as conventionals. That's like, just go to town, use whatever you so wish. Then integrated pest management, I would say, is kind of a happy medium. So integrated pest management recognizes the benefits of pesticides including synthetic pesticides and some of their use, but also recognizes that their overuse or misuse, or perhaps the selection of certain ones, can be more beneficial than not using them, say, at all. And so there is no label on packaging that says IPM, integrated pest management, right? So you're competing with the conventional market. You can't charge a premium for IPM. And so what you're trying to do is you're being very smart about how you're spraying, when you're spraying, why you're spraying, in order to decrease your costs, and also by preventing pests in the first place. So we want to minimize impact on the environment, minimize impact on human health, maintain or increase soil fertility. We're looking at long-term pest management, prevent pesticide-resistant pests, and lastly, strives to maximize long-term returns and savings. So again, instead of, say, spraying on a calendar schedule, you're actually monitoring for your pests and making pest management decisions based on the populations in the field. So if we're to look at the IPM pyramid, all right, this is what it might look a little bit differently depending on the commodity or the textbook you look into. I like to think at the very foundation is monitoring and scouting. All right, so at the very forefront, to have a good IPM program, if you haven't started anything yet, you don't know where to begin, I would say start with a good monitoring scouting program. And we'll talk about what that actually means and how to kind of establish that. Then is cultural and sanitary practices. So this is kind of making sure you clean up, right? So if you're weeding, or you should be weeding around the area, removing those weeds out of the area, maybe potentially even bagging them and removing them, or taking them to a compost pile a good distance away, because you might have either diseases or insect pests that, as those plants start to wilt, are going to move right back onto your crops. You need to make sure that you're moving those good ways away. We have physical and mechanical, which might be physical barriers or physically removing. So I worked on an organic farm for a little while where we literally would pick off, they had Colorado potato beetles on their eggplants. We literally picked off all the beetles by hand and put them in a soapy bucket. So in a smaller acreage type situation, that may be not only more feasible, actually make more sense than mixing up a pesticide, spraying the pesticide, cleaning out your pesticide tank. And so it can be not only quicker, but less costly. Then biological, this can be our beneficial predators and parasitic wasps. It can be promoting them or releasing them. Or it could also be biological insecticides. So there are things like BT, for example. There is a bacteria that creates a toxin. So the bacteria is known as Bacillus thuringiensis. The toxin has been isolated and incorporated into a pesticide. And lastly, you see the very tip here. So your pesticides, especially your synthetic pesticides, are kind of your last resort. You're ideally reserving pesticides in an IPM program to when all this other stuff has failed, right? So this is when you start to get flare-ups of populations. And then even then, we're being very cautious about what we're choosing to use. We're making sure we rotate. We're using different pesticides each time so we don't get insecticide resistance. So we'll kind of get into some of those details as we move along. So starting off with monitoring and scouting. So here are some tools of the trade. First, first I'm going to refer you to see, all right? A good hand lens goes a far way, being able to see those small insects. It really helps to have one of these pocket lenses on hand. I don't happen to have a pocket lens on me. Instead, what I use is a smartphone lens. So I have my smartphone camera. This is a specific type of case from Moment, and you can actually clip in. I have a 10x little macro lens that kind of clips into there. And there are some others that can clip onto a phone camera as well that work quite well. You just make sure to read reviews, because a lot of them will cause some bad aberrations, or just the image won't be very clear. So there are some differences in the quality of the lenses. So you want to make sure, a decent one might run you about $50 for a clip-on to a phone. We also have yellow sticky cards. All right, yellow sticky cards, or in this case, is a yellow sticky tape that you can put around the perimeter of your plant. The yellow sticky cards you're basically putting right above the canopy of your plant. And yellow is thought to be relatively attractive to a number of flying insect pests. All right, so this yellow is one of the wavelengths released by kind of new plant growth, and so it looks delicious. They fly into it and it's sticky, and they get stuck. And then you can actually look at what's on there to get an idea of what kind of insects are maybe migrating in or out. All right. It's not going to give you a very good idea of abundance of the pest, right? So if you just see one on here, it doesn't mean you have very low populations. You might have very high populations and just one happened to get onto that card. There's been a number of studies trying to correlate it, and it's a relatively weak correlation, but it just gives you an idea of what's actually there. We also have aspirators. So in this case, you have a little vial right here. You have this thing where you cause suction. So you suck in here, it creates a little vacuum, and your insect goes in here. You got to make sure there's a filter in here unless you're planning on having an insect smoothie that morning. And that filter will prevent that insect from going back in that straw into your mouth. This is one way of collecting these insects in vials. If you want to submit the sample, you want to look at it under a microscope if you have one handy. That's a very useful mechanism to look at insects. You can stick this vial into the refrigerator, or if you want to kill them in the freezer for a couple hours, and then bring them out. It might be a little bit easier to look at them with your hand lens then as well. And I like to always have little contraptions on me, little baggies, vials, containers, because you never know when you're going to see something that you're not sure what it is. And you're not going to have a chance to kind of leave the field, grab a container, or come back and find it again. So you might need to, capture it right there and then to submit a sample or to take a picture or something like that. You could send it to me for identification, or send it to your county agents, and so on and so forth. If you have you're establishing like a good monitoring program, a regular one you're checking on a weekly basis, which I would encourage. A head lens can be very handy. So this one here, they're on Amazon for less than $20 a piece. And this goes on your head, and you bring it down, and it's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, right? Like when he's up in that tent, he's looking for the kids in the grass. Okay, it's the same idea. It's this little head lens, so both your hands can be free to flip over leaves. A lot of these insects are usually on the undersides of these leaves, and look for the insects. And it's just a lot easier than trying to use a hand lens. We also have insect nets. So if you have things like grasshoppers, even some caterpillars are sometimes easier to catch in a net than they are to see on the plant, because once you start manipulating the plant, they will sometimes just drop to the ground. An insect net can be handy for collecting things as well. And there are some ways of proper sweeping, right? There's a very proper sweeping technique in order to be consistent in how you sweep. So you can use this as a general idea of how your populations are changing week after week. So if you do 3 sweeps in one area, and the next week you do 3 sweeps in that same area, you can see if the population is increased in your net or not. There are different colored sticky traps. In general, I'm not going to go into the detail, but in general, it has been thought that the blue sticky trap is better than for thrips. And that's a species we're going to talk about here, or a group of insects we're going to talk about here in a little while. But in general, it seems like the yellow sticky trap can work just as effectively as a blue sticky trap for thrips. Now, if you really want to try something to see if it works better, you might want to put that yellow and that blue right next to each other and just see if that blue sticky trap catches those thrips earlier or more consistently. And if it does, then just buy the blue from that same company, because every company might sell a slightly different hue of blue, and stick to it. We also have there's all kinds of homemade traps that one can make as well. So in Texas, we do have this particular pest known as spotted winged Drosophila. So if you're going to start growing any soft-bodied fruit, it wouldn't hurt to monitor for that particular pest. And you can do that with this bottle here. I've cut out the side, put some drywall tape, so that prevents large insects from getting in there. Put some apple cider vinegar in the bottom, so they get attracted, they go in. This red tape, the color red, is thought to be quite attractive to this particular pest. So they get attracted to both the color and the smell of the apple cider vinegar, and they go in and drown, and you can collect that on a regular basis to look for that particular pest. And here's an example of those sticky cards. And you can see here, I'm wearing a glove. This is, when I'm originally from Canada. I moved here just about 7 years ago now. And I remember when I first moved here, I still had this, what do you call it? Innocent Canadian mind, where I could just dig around in the ground and grab things out of the ground without any harm, right? And it wasn't until my second week that I grabbed one of these sticky traps, and I got a bunch of fire ant stings. And from then on, I I was wearing gloves. I think I've gone back to not wearing gloves. I'm a lot more careful now. I know kind of how and where to find them, but certainly I was not too pleased at that time. Other scouting tools, all right, there, you could use, I do recommend a white piece of foam board or thick cardstock inside of a plastic sleeve, all right, and that'll kind of help protect it and use it over and over and over again. And what I'm doing here with this amazing animation is I'm slapping this plant, in this case a flower, again for thrips, because thrips can be hard to see on the plant, especially when they're in the flower. But if you slap that flower and you have a white piece of foam board under it, those thrips will fall on that foam board and they're a lot easier to see then. So I'm using this as a scouting tool. And then never underestimate the importance of hand inspection. So here's a group of aphids, a little aphid family that just by flipping over the leaf and looking there, I was able to find. So anytime I'm looking for insects or I'm scouting, quite frequently, I'm very rapidly just flipping over leaves and inspecting very closely and continuing to flip over leaves and using that head lens as well. And we can also look with that hand inspection just for damage. So here, this is an example of some stippling damage, right? So this is the type of damage we get often from some type of sucking or rasping insect, such as aphids or spider mites or thrips, which we'll, again, talk about those here in a moment. So when we're actually creating a monitoring or scouting program, it helps to create what's referred to as pest management units. So there was that individual that was looking at starting a hemp farm, for example. You might have a few different hemp fields, some that are close to a forest border, some that are a little bit more into the interior, maybe some that are close to some cherry orchards or some other types of crops. You might want to identify those as separate pest management units. You're scouting them separately. You're identifying them as having maybe different pest pressures. You might be spraying pesticides on them as separate units, right? In a greenhouse setting, for greenhouse growers, it's very well defined because each greenhouse can just be its own pest management unit. By doing this, you start to recognize over time, maybe the ones by the forest tend to get higher pressure of particular pests because you have immigration from that forest from some kind of other crop or other plant that's in there. Whereas maybe, if you're close to cherry orchards, you have a lot of natural predators because, maybe when the cherries are in bloom, you're attracting a lot of beneficials that are then moving into those plants. So it helps to kind of break it down first into pest management units. Now, within each of those units, so in this case, it's a small acreage farm, for example. You might have these pest management units as each individual garden bed. Now, when you're actually within that pest management unit, we want to know what's the best way to sample, right? How do we know if there's a pest in 10,000 plants? How do we want to know if we have a growing population of aphids? Well, it's impractical to look at every single plant, right? So here, just as a simple illustration, I'm saying, let's say there's 20 plants. Let's say there are 20 massive trees, right? So take forever to scout 20 massive trees. But if we did, and we knew exactly what was on there, and let's just say we found 4 of them, okay, in this case, we're doing presence absence. On 4 of them, there was a pest. On the other 16, there was not. Then we would say there's about a 20% infestation rate, all right? Now, if we, again, so it might be impractical to look at every single one. So if we do a random sample, so in this case, we're only looking at every 3rd plant. So looking at this one, skip this one, skip this one, skip this one, so on and so forth. You'll notice that by kind of randomly selecting, it's pseudo-random, right? It's not really random. But by random-ish selecting, we end up with, it's going to let me, all right. Well, we end up with 1 out of, I think it's 1 out of 6. Yeah, here we go, which is about 17%. All right. So that's pretty close to that 20%. And that's what we want. When we're doing sampling, when we're reducing the number of plants we're looking at, we still want it to be representative of what's potentially going on there. So one way of doing that is by selecting throughout your crop, right? So it's possible. Usually pest infestations are not so randomly scattered. It might be these 3 right here would be infested. So if you only looked at those first 4 plants or first 6 plants, you would conclude that there is no infestation. On the other hand, if you only looked at the 6 plants down here, you would conclude that there's very high infestation, right? So it helps to look randomly throughout your particular crop. We can also, as a simple measure, instead of just saying presence absence, yes, there are pests or no pests, we might actually create a scale from, let's say, 0 to 1, 2, 3. All right. So 3 being very highly infested, 2 being medium infested, 1 being very low infestation. By doing this, we give ourselves an idea of the progression of that infestation over time. We might actually flag the ones. I do recommend getting some flagging tape, or if you're dealing with smaller potted plants, it might be some stakes or something like that, or other flags on a stake that you can stick in the pot. And in this case, we're flagging this to give us an idea of what's the worst case scenario. If you at this point don't feel like you need to spray any pesticides, you might come back a week later to see if this plant's doing worse or better. It is possible that with the movement of predators into this area, that they're starting to suppress that pest, and so you can feel a little bit better if all of a sudden those pest numbers are down. If it's continuing to increase, you know it's time to do something, right? In the same light, if you sprayed a pesticide and you see these populations are still growing, then shoot, your pesticide didn't work so well, right? And so this can be a good signal, a good indicator, right, of what is your worst case scenario. We also have several traps and lures. We already spoke about yellow sticky traps. In this case, this is a pheromone, a very specific chemical cue that's being released specific to this moth. So female moths attract males out in the wild by releasing what's referred to as sex pheromone. It's a chemical cue that they fan off of their bodies, and the males can detect that with their antennae. And that's how they find mates and are able to mate. We have these chemical entomologists, they're like the wizards of our field of study, that basically concoct these sex pheromones specific to each of these species, right? It's got to be specific, otherwise the female is going to be attracting all kinds of different species. So they're very a specific chemical signature that then scientists have been able to replicate, and there are these traps available. So if you're dealing with, let's say, the squash vine borer, you grow any type of squash or cucurbits that gets the squash vine borer, there is a pheromone trap for it. And if you're growing it for any type of income, I would highly recommend you get a pheromone trap so that you know when those males are starting to fly and look for females. That tells you when the females are starting to mate and lay eggs, which means you can go in and start doing preventative applications of, say, BT in the fronds, in where they're actually the base of the plant where they're laying those eggs, so you can stop them before they burrow in. All right, so here's an example, right? So this is a plum maggot trap. All right, this thing right here is the pheromone. This is releasing the chemical. This is a sticky card. And these are all males that have come in and got stuck on that trap. There's also some generalist traps, right? So when I was back in graduate school, my roommate and I, this was back during my master's, we had a fruit fly infestation, right? How appropriate that the two entomologists would have a fruit fly infestation. And, we were able to quickly resolve it by, we made these, got these bottles, these soda bottles, and cut off the top and inverted it so it makes a funnel. And inside, you're putting some apple cider vinegar, a few drops of soap. So that helps break the surface tension of the liquid so they can't float on it. And let them come in. And over time, they would go into that trap, go in that water and drown. So there's a whole lot of flies actually sitting in that liquid there. Pardon me. I already spoke about the spotted wing Drosophila trap. There is a video on YouTube on how to make this specific type of trap, DIYing it. So there's actually a peanut butter jar that painted the lid red. Again, red tape with, in this case, again, drywall tape using hot glue gun to adhere it there. And this was a yeast trap, which didn't work or worked just as well as apple cider vinegar, but it was a lot messier. So still recommend just using apple cider vinegar with a couple drops of soap there in the bottom. Let's skip that one. Yeah, we've already kind of gone through this. So I do recommend taking good notes when you're scouting and monitoring as well. So this is a monitoring form from Mr. Awesome's nursery. Here's an example where in each field you have several samples, and that's several different plants you may be looking at. And you want to enter some essential information, like what is the date of this scouting? What's the scout's name, Mr. Awesome himself? Which plot, or in this case, which pest management unit? All right, are we talking about? Which pest management unit are you looking at? What's the crop? What's the crop stage? And these are very important because maybe at specific crop stages, year after year, you'll find a certain pattern in pests. Over time, if you keep these type of records, I assure you, you will know more about your pest challenges and when they occur than I can, right? It's impossible for me to know everyone's pest challenges because everyone's situation is very different. By keeping your own records, you'll know it better than I. And so for each of these samples, right, so you stop at a plant and you're looking at it, you might first do a damage rating. Like, do you see any sucking or rasping damage, any defoliation or chewing damage? All right. This is a form, again, that you can develop over time. Maybe you'll add some columns or move some things that are relevant to your particular crop. Then an infestation rating, right? So we see no aphids, so we do a 1. Maybe thrips is a 2. You saw some armyworm 1. 2 spotted spider mite 2. Then we're doing a little beating of the flour, right, onto that white foam board, and we're actually counting the thrips that fall out. So again, by taking these records and consistently, say on a weekly basis, and keeping them year after year, you'll get an idea of some of your pest patterns over time. Especially if you're doing like one crop, like hemp, right? That'll really help you know what kinds of things you're dealing with over time. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the common culprits. First, starting off with thrips, which is in this group known as Thysanoptera, which is short for basically fringed wings. All right, so they have these wings that have these hairs on them, and that's kind of where their name is derived. There's several different species, such as greenhouse thrips. We have adult western flower thrips. We even have chili thrips. If you're down in the Houston area or further south, these chili thrips can be quite a pain. They're quite small. They'll feed on stems and right at the base of the leaves when they start to come out of the stems. And even in roses, for example, they can cause a witch's broom type effect. So they can cause this like extra branching and really change the shape and form of the plant. Now, in terms of their general life cycle, they're usually laying their eggs on or in the plant tissue. All right. And it's going to be an egg for 2.5 to 4 days. And then you're going to get these different instars. So that's basically your immature stages. So your immatures are starting to feed, but they still do not have wings at this point. So that's going to take about 3 to 6 days until they're no longer immature. They're then going to go into this pre-pupal and pupal stage. During this time, they're getting their wings, right? And they're developing into the adult form. And they're not feeding. So it means if you're spraying something that's an anti-feedant, or maybe it's a contact insecticide, these pupae and prepupae are often in the soil or leaf litter. If you're spraying the foliage, you're missing all of these pupae and prepupae. Until a week later, all of a sudden, these adults come out that are laying 150 to 300 eggs a piece and can live 30 to 45 days. So it's very important. We talk about when we talk about pesticide use, we talk about breaking the life cycle. So if you're having a huge population of thrips and you need to manage them, one application is rarely enough unless it's a residual insecticide. It's something that's going to last on there for a good while. If it's not a residual insecticide, usually we need to apply it twice. Once, that's going to get our current adults and immatures that are above the ground. The second time, about a week later, when our pupae and prepupae have emerged as new adults. Pardon me. And thrips have these rasping mouth parts, right? So they're basically scratching the leaf surface and it's bleeding out and they're sucking on it, very similar to sucking damage, but it can look something like this. So if you see damage or symptoms on the plant that looks like this, right? It's very fine speckling. It's very different than a whole part of the leaf yellowing, right? Or from the tips yellowing and coming up, or the edges yellowing. This is kind of this speckling, and you can see it's happening a lot along the leaf veins. At this point, it may help to look on the underside of the leaves for those immatures or the matures. Again, thrips are actually very small, so it does help to use a hand or head lens. Now, thrips can also cause a number of viruses known as viruses. So that's something to be aware of as well, that you can get this interesting symptomology that might not look like speckling or rasping damage, you see the thrips on there, and it may be that they're starting to vector a particular virus that then needs to be dealt with. All right, so we kind of just covered the scouting and monitoring of thrips. Now going on to two-spotted spider mites are much smaller than thrips, right? Even harder to see with the naked eye. It does help to get a head lens. You can see the eggs right here, and these here are some of the matures. And they do also cause sucking rasping damage. When you get very high populations, you start to get webbing. And when you get webbing, they can be very hard to control, even with pesticides, because penetration of the pesticide past that webbing can be very challenging. So it's very important to try and prevent their population from growing too rapidly. Now, some things that can cause their populations to grow are dry, dusty conditions and very high fertilizer rates or inadvertent killing of their predators. So there are some thrips, such as Western flower thrips, for example, that are actually predatory as well. They help eat spider mites. So they eat their eggs, and I believe possibly even their first instar nymph. And so if you're very rigorous on a thrips management program and always notice a two-spotted spider mite population outburst a little later on, you may want to reconsider your management program. Or you may want to make sure that you're ready right after your thrips control, you're ready for your two-spotted spider mite management right after. So here's some example of this, the rasping or sucking damage in this case that the two-spotted spider mites cause. You can see it's very similar to thrips. So that's where it helps to inspect the actual leaves. So in terms of the general life cycle of two-spotted spider mites, can take anywhere from 8 to 40 days from egg to adult. And the reason why there's a huge variation there is it's all insects, actually, all arthropods. So, includes spider mites as well. Their developmental rate varies greatly with temperature. So the warmer it is, the quicker they develop up to a certain threshold, right? When it gets too hot, then they can, potentially cease developing and or die. But usually in our conditions, right, when in the peak of that summer, we can get very rapid population growth as a result of the quicker development time. Now, going on to caterpillars, all right, they can be kind of the bane of a fruit and vegetable grower because they can cause a whole lot of defoliation, especially when we're talking about hornworms. Now, if you ever see something like this is actually considered kind of beneficial. All right. So in this case, there's been a wasp that's laid some eggs inside this caterpillar. Those caterpillars have fed on the insides of this caterpillar and eventually come out as these little pupae. All right. And they're going to come out as new wasps. And they've drastically decreased the survival chance, if not actually killed this caterpillar in the process. And these new wasps coming out, and they're very small. When I say wasp, I'm not talking about the human stinging kind. I'm talking the very tiny, harmless to people kind. They're going to look for some more caterpillars for you and continue doing some management. So if you can spare not killing this one or moving it to a plant that maybe isn't as important, that would be great because you're going to get some good control without you having to spend any extra money. Now we have a number of other caterpillars to watch out for as well. We have a number of what's referred to as army worms, right? This fall army worm, you can see this inverted V or inverted Y on its head. It's kind of a distinct feature, and it has these 3 lines going down its body. And in Texas, we have 3 to 4 generations. And they lay about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs in their lifetime and have over 80 hosts. Now, they prefer grasses. So that means if you find them on some of your broadleaf plants, it's likely that they were just there because there's a lot of grasses around and they coincidentally got on there. It doesn't mean that you need to spray for them, right? Maybe unless you have a high population on your broadleaf plants, you can probably just let them go. We have beet armyworm as well. Okay, and they have several generations as well within a year. And they lay 300 to 600 eggs in their lifetime, and they have a wide host range from flower, field, and vegetable. And they feed on foliage and fruit. So this is one that if you see it, is probably a little bit more important to manage, right? Because it's actually going to cause a lot more damage to your fruit and or vegetables. Now, in terms of the general life cycle, they're usually laying their eggs in these clusters. Okay, so this is several eggs together, and they come out and they have these different immature stages that they go through. Now, what's very important to note is that in these first few stages, usually first 3 instars or so, they eat very little of their overall larval diet. They eat about 15% of their total lifetime diet. It's not until those last 2 stages that they eat 85% of their overall diet. They call these armyworms for 2 reasons. One, they kind of move together, usually in a field, almost like in a front. You can completely take out a field or have been recorded to do so, like an army. But also because they kind of go unnoticed and all of a sudden start all eating at the same time. So their damage seems very sudden. And it's because since they're all laid at the same time, right? It's like a single cohort. They all overnight, almost 1 or 2 days, go from this stage to this stage. And that's when they start feeding a lot. So it's very important to catch them here. If you can catch them very early, you can catch them before they've caused a whole lot of damage and manage them before they start really tearing up your field. So very important to look at that. So here's something that just help reiterate and hopefully help you remember, right? Dad, caterpillars are in the yard. How many? Tons. Armyworms. You can see he's faced the trauma before, right? And then from there, they will pupate, right? And that's when they start to metamorphose, transform into an adult, and become this winged adults and continue on. They do cause chewing damage, right? They have chewing mouth parts. So if you see chewing damage, it's not going to be a thrips. It's not going to be a spider mites. It's going to be something with chewing mouth parts, such as caterpillars. And so here are some examples of that chewing damage that you may see there. All right. Now going on to whiteflies and aphids, I just want to quickly check in with Kate here. I think we have until 9:50 or 9:55, or is it 10:20, or what time? When do I
Right.
get to?
Yeah, you have our next speaker starts at 10. So if you want to leave a few minutes for questions,
All
I'll
right,
let you
sure thing.
manage that last 15 minutes.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so next, whiteflies and aphids. So we'll kind of go through this a little bit quicker. I won't go in too much detail in the life cycle. But whiteflies this year, when was it? Around October, that I got reports in Dallas, Austin, and in East Texas of a whole lot of whiteflies in the landscapes. These tiny little white flies, all right, that have sucking mouth parts, and they have a very broad host range. They feed on a lot of different types of plants. And there are some populations that are highly resistant to insecticides, to a number of insecticides. So it's very important when we're dealing with whiteflies to be aware of potential insecticide resistance. Just because an insecticide label says it manages whiteflies doesn't mean it'll manage all populations. So here's the adult. Here are the eggs. Very hard to see with the naked eye. Here are some of those immature stages. Okay, so that's our first instar, our second instar, third, fourth, and then what we refer to as a pupa, which is a latter part of this fourth instar. So starting to become an adult, and it becomes an adult. All these stages are very flat on the leaf, and so they're very hard to see with the naked eye, and they're relatively transparent. So it really helps, again, to use a head lens to be able to see them, and it might take some practice to really recognize them. And with that sucking damage, in this case with whiteflies and aphids, they are actually producing honeydew, which is this sticky solution, which over time can be covered or inoculated by this concoction of molds referred to as sooty mold. The mold itself does not kill the plant, but it drastically reduces the aesthetics, right? And it can reduce the growth of the plant as well. It's really not something you'd want to get on the produce that you're trying to sell, or if you're trying to sell some herbs, it'll be a major problem as well. And then going on to aphids, also very similar to whiteflies in some ways in that they cause sucking damage. So this is the proboscis, what it uses to stick inside the leaf and feed on those juices. And I'm going to kind of fly through this, as amazing as it is. All aphids, just to kind of give you a quick snapshot, all aphids in the summer are clones of their mothers and produce offspring that, they don't need to mate, and they're all clones of their mothers, and they produce about 2 to 3 live offspring every day. So they are reproducing at a very rapid rate. And it's not until a plant starts to get crowded that they actually produce winged aphids as well. So if you see winged aphids, so not all aphids will grow up to become winged, only some of them do as a result of some environmental conditions. So when they start to become winged, that's an idea that there is either a high density of aphids nearby and they're starting to move in, or there's a high density in your crop. And you're only going to see these winged ones on your yellow sticky traps. You're not going to see the non-winged ones, right? So those yellow sticky traps that we talked about earlier are only going to really catch those winged insects. And so here's an example of an aphid female that's giving birth to a live offspring right there. And these little dots here are not beauty marks. That's actually the eyes of the other offspring inside that mother at the same time. These are unique features of aphids known as cornicles or sifunculi, which are communication chimneys. So they are releasing what's referred to as an alarm pheromone, a chemical that goes into the air to let others know of potential danger happening nearby, which we'll see here in a moment. So here you can see several babies. This is inside, dissecting inside the aphid, several babies, embryos, basically that are all along different parts of the production line, right? So this is kind of like a automotive factory here, right? It's all through different phases of production at the same time. And ants actually will protect a number of sucking insects. If you see an ant population moving around on a plant, they're not carrying large leaves, right? If they're not leafcutter ants, but they're just moving around, there's a good chance you might have some sucking insects on there because they like the honeydew. They like that sugary solution they produce. And so as a result, they will not only protect these sucking insects and feed on the honeydew, but they will help move them around. So this ant is actually moving that aphid to a new spot to start a new colony of aphids. So oftentimes, ant management can be very important in pest management, right? Managing other pests on a particular crop for this very reason. Now we can see this situation here. We have this funny thing, right? So we got aphids on this plant. We also have ants here, right, that are protecting the aphids. We got here this golden aphid. What that is referred to as an aphid mummy. So this is the movie Alien, right? I promised you that insects are basically mini aliens. Well, this is the movie Alien brought to life for you, all right? This thing right here, this is a parasitic wasp. So I spoke about these tiny wasps earlier. That's going to lay an egg inside this aphid. So this is a beneficial insect for you growers. Now pay attention to this, the cornicles here. You're going to see this little drop form. See that drop right there? That's alarm pheromone. Anyway, so this is the egg inside that aphid starting to form into a larva. There's a larva feeding on the insides of the aphid until nothing's left but the carcass of the aphid and this little cocoon, a new wasp cocoon under that carcass. And that larva becomes a new wasp and emerges out. So when you see these inflated aphids, all right, that are kind of stuck on the leaf, they can be gold, brown, or black. You have a parasitic wasp population. So you may want to encourage their populations rather than going crazy on insecticide applications. All right. We got leaf-footed bugs as well. Let me just see, actually, real quick. I think leaf-footed bugs is the last one that I had. But you know what? I think I'm going to leave it at that for some time for questions. And I just quickly want to point out some resources. So for insect identification, bugguide.net is an excellent resource that is basically vetted by a lot of entomologists around the country as well. So I'll often use it as a resource to try and look for some insect specimens, but also you can submit it again to your county agent or myself for identification. There is an excellent book, Garden Insects of North America. It's a pretty thick book, few hundred pages and very good images, and it's really not that expensive. So it's a very good guidebook for common garden insects of North America, which includes some of the common ones that you may face in production as well. And there's also the Coffin Field Guide to Insects of North America as well, which is a smaller book, a little bit more practical for carrying out in the field. Again, lots of excellent pictures for identifying some of your most common insects that you may encounter in the field. If you want to stay up to date with, some of the insect pests that I talk about, some of the research that I do, I have a Facebook page, Six-Legged Aggie. I also have a website, sixleggedaggie.com, that you can follow as well. And I also have a podcast that I've started with a horticulturalist that we talk about some research that is like horticultural entomology research. We try and digest it for general audience. And that podcast is called Jolly Green Scientists. So if you look up in your favorite podcast player, Jolly Green Scientists, you will find that podcast in there and you can subscribe. And that is all. So I'd be more than happy to take questions. You can always send me an email if you have some that you'd prefer to, add some images or more detail. But at this time, if there are any other questions about this presentation, I'd be happy to take them.
All right, thanks, Irfan. Do we have any questions? Feel free to unmute your mic and ask those questions.
Hey, Kate.
Yeah,
this
Joe.
Is Joe. This is Joe Price. Can we get these things, these sessions, linked to us or available to where we can watch them again? I've been in and out of my. I'm working on my truck at the moment.
Oh yeah, sure.
I've missed some stuff, and it looks like it's been really good what I missed, and I'd like to see it again if it's possible.
You bet, Joe. I've been recording, and we'll get these posted, and I can send the link out to everybody. I should have all your email addresses, so that's.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I'll ask another one if nobody's going to ask one.
Go for it.
Is there, I've had a hard time finding thresholds sometime on some of my insects. Is there a good place to find a good source of information on thresholds, as far as when you need to do something?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So for it depends greatly on the commodity. So what type of are you growing a mix of different things, or what types of things are you growing?
Yeah, I have a mix. I've got everything from stone fruit trees to cucurbits and leafy greens. If you can grow it in a garden, I've got it. I've got about 30 acres.
Yeah, so that's where it gets really interesting. So some of our main field crops like corn, cotton, sorghum, wheat, so on and so forth, we have some pretty well-established thresholds. And that's just because it's relatively, easier to develop a threshold when you are dealing with large monocrops with very specific pests. When we're talking about these mixtures of other plants, unfortunately, and you could probably find online on some different extension websites, some thresholds as general guidelines. University of California has a number of good text materials like, books and manuals that one can acquire that would have some thresholds in there. But I would caution against using them by the book. And the reason is because thresholds are, greatly vary depending on the price of that commodity is going for. If you're selling, say, to fresh market, or you're selling to, a packing house, it can vary greatly depending on the pest that we're talking about. So what I would suggest is just starting off by developing a good monitoring program and try and get an idea of some of your trends in pest populations over time. So try not to jump the gun too early on a lot of your pest management. And instead, just, if the population seems to be, present in your field, see where it is the next week. If it increases again, then you may go ahead and spray. And maybe next time you'll say, well, when I reach that population that I did last week, that's kind of my threshold, right? Because it seems like the population just continues to grow after that. So, you're kind of having to establish your own thresholds based on experience that you're going to gain in your own field over time.
Hey, I have a question. I grow tomatoes in raised beds, and I do move them around, but every year I get a ton of the spider mites. Where are they coming from?
Yeah, they could be coming from from anywhere. Spider mites, I can't remember if two-spotted spider mites specifically will do what's referred to as ballooning. So there are some insects that when they form webs, they actually try and basically catch their web in the wind to use that to float around, right? Almost like little parachutes. So spider mites, they have all kinds of ways of potential dispersal. They may be latching onto other larger insects or birds or things like that, like we see with some scale insects. So dispersal, usually insects can get around, especially if you're just moving around from one raised bed to the next. There's no doubt if the population is established in the area that they can get back on your plant. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out if if you have those dry, dusty conditions, you may consider, especially early on before maybe those tomatoes start to grow, so you don't impact your actual fruit. You may consider periodically hosing off your plants. You could also maybe check on your fertilizer rates a little bit. I mean, if you're fertilizing a little heavy or whatever compost you're putting in there, if it's a little bit heavy, that might also promote their populations. Alternatively, you might just look at some things like safer soap or some insecticides that have very low residual to actually just at least kind of punch down those spider mite populations before they really become a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Nobody else is asking. I can ask, does it do a lot of good just to wash all the aphids off your plants? Will they crawl back up there?
So, I can't tell you in terms of an actual percentage or replicated data. I can say that by washing the aphids off, you are certainly reducing their chances of survival. There are a number of predators that are ground dwelling, like ground beetles, that by knocking those aphids out of the ground, you give those ground beetles a chance to eat those aphids. So that may help as well. Now, whether that's going to really be worth your time, or if it's, really, making a big difference, that I wouldn't be able to comment on. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I did it once and they all came back.
Yeah. So they certainly are relatively mobile. I mean, especially the winged, but even the non-winged are relatively mobile. Again, you may have reduced their populations a bit, but whether it's worth it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I hate to close off the questions, but we do need to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Irfan. That was really great. Appreciate
Absolutely.
you being
Thank
here
you
this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, and we will switch over now to Dr. Larry Stein. Are you there, Dr. Stein?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. All right. You should be able to share your screen, hopefully.
All right, let me try.
Okay.
Let's see, wait a minute. Don't you have to, let's see.
I need to give you.
So I'm not a co-host. I think you got to make me a co-host, right?
I think you should be able to do. I think it was
able
enabled for
to.
participants to screen share.
Oh,
Mhm.
there it is. Share screen. Okay, very
There
good.
you
So now I got to find the right screen to share.
go. That's always the challenge.
So,
There.
so
There we go.
So what are you seeing?
We're seeing your desktop. So yeah, if you click on your
Okay.
PowerPoint. Oh, do you have two screens? There we go.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's all right. All right. Well, introduce you. Dr. Stein is the Associate Department Head for Horticulture at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. He's out in Uvalde, but I understand you probably spend a lot of time in College Station.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And he specializes in pecans, fruits, and vegetables. So long time career in extension, certainly And we appreciate that. Appreciate you being here this morning to talk to us about vegetable fertilization. Again, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat, or we'll leave some time at the end to answer those questions. But with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Stein.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. We're going to talk a little bit about vegetable fertilization today, which is going to apply to a lot of different crops. Obviously, you're looking at a field of cabbage here, a commercial field of cabbage, very well developed frame, which is what you need to develop to get a good head on cabbage. And so we're going to talk about the basics of fertilizers today. We'll talk about different types. We'll talk about soil tests. We'll talk about foliar fertilizers. And so we'll cover a wide range of topics this morning that will hopefully help you in some of your operations. The most important thing you need to realize about fertilizers, though, is they're not miracle products. You know, there's a lot of people say, we'll just throw some fertilizer on it and that'll cure the problem. But, you know, you got to realize that nutrition is just one of the components of a sound production program. And so you have to have all these other things in place. They have to be all right for fertilizer to actually do some good. Realize it takes some 20 essential chemical elements to grow plants. You know, a lot of people always forget about the big four: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That's 95% of the plant solids. I mean, basically, you're getting these three from the atmosphere, and then nitrogen is a big one that is often lacking. And then you have these other 16. But realize the one that it's lacking, I mean, if it's 20, you know, I was talking to a nutrition person the other day, and so I said, well, how many are essential today? You know, you have all these textbooks that add some. And he said, well, I only consider like 13, you know. And so he didn't include the first three, you know, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And so then you have some here that are in less that you don't often hear about: cobalt, sodium, silicon, and different things. But realize all of these are important. The plants need all 16 in order to grow and develop. And if one is lacking, then that's going to be the problem that you have to deal with. And so what we like to do to start out is do a soil test. I mean, if you've never done one, you need to do one. Realize soil testing is not exact science. You know, a lot of people like to test the soil. Well, we need to apply this and this and this, and you do that. You go out there and do that, and everything's hunky-dory. And as you well know, that's not often the case. But it does give us some good baseline data where we're at, where we need to potentially be, etc. Now realize the soil test sample, the results that you get back are only as good as the sample that you take. And I personally like to sample from 1 to 6 and from 6 to 12 inches. So I get 2 plastic buckets, I get a sharpshooter shovel here, and then I'm going to take a minimum of 8 to 10 subsamples across the field. And the other thing you have to figure out is when you look at your field is the color of the soil all the same type in the entire field. You may have black land over here, you may have yellow soil over here, and so obviously those are 2 different soil types, and you would need to sample them separately. So what I do is with my sharpshooter shovel, I'll dig down 6 inches. I'll slice a piece off of soil from 1 to 6. It goes into the 1 to 6 bucket. I dig that same hole down to 12 inches, sample a piece of soil from 6 to 12, and it goes in the other bucket. And then, like I said, I'll do that 8 to 10 spots across the field so that I get a very uniform sample of the field. If you have time and can get more samples than that, you're going to get a better read of what you really have out in that field. And so if you've never done one, you need to do one of those so that you get a good idea of what kind of baseline data you have out there in that field. Realize fertilizers are salts, and the amount of salt that you have is going to vary with the type of fertilizer. Realize that if you put too much fertilizer out there, water is going to move out of the plant. It's going to burn the leaves. So fertilizer can be good, too much, not as good, too close can be an issue. So here is a situation where there is a pecan This guy used some liquid fertilizer put around the pecan tree. You see it ran out here into the wheat intercrop there. And so what's happening is that water out of the plants, out of the wheat, is trying to neutralize the salt here on the ground. So instead of the water moving into the plant, it's going to move out of the plant. And so that's why we tell you when you plant, you don't want to have a lot of nitrogen out there so that you don't create a situation here where you can create this type of situation. Didn't damage the tree, but it sure did damage the crop here. And so too much, too close can be an issue. And so you need to be aware of that. Realize the only reason fertilizers work is because of water. And so what water does is it moves it into the root zone. So you apply fertilizer, water moves it down into the root zone. Different fertilizers are very different, have different rates of solubility. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Like phosphorus doesn't move via water, but nitrogen does. So if all you need is nitrogen, you can put nitrogen on top. Quarter to a half inch of water will take it right into the soil and you will be good. So water moves the nitrogen into the root zone. It moves it from the root zone to the root, and it moves from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. And so if we go back to this picture right here, typically the water concentration outside the plant is higher than it is inside the plant. And so water goes like this. Well, in this case, the water concentration is actually higher in the plants than it is in the ground. And so that's why the water moving to neutralize this salt right here. And so that's the gist of what's happening with this higher concentration to the lower concentration. Realize also that many years you see nutrient deficiencies on your plants, but it may just be a drought problem. You know, if you don't have the water to move the nutrients into the ground and into the plant, well, then you're going to have a nutrient deficiency. And so be aware that water is a real critical part of the process. Now, plants have a lot of roots, you know, but a lot of those roots are just to support the plant. So realize it's only the top 3 to 6 inches of the soil that has really good oxygen. And so that's where your new growing root tips are going to be. It's only those new growing root tips that are going to take up the water and nutrients. And so realize that these roots constantly die and regenerate. And so oxygen, though, is the real key to getting water absorption as well as fertility absorption. So we talk about water. You got to get your water right. Here we're using sprinkler to irrigate this vegetable crop. Sprinklers are okay to use on certain crops. We worry about disease issues if you keep it wet at night, but realize sprinkler is a system that can work. Most of the time we advocate drip irrigation to keep the foliage wet, but realize that sprinkler can be used. Here is a situation where we have poorly drained soil though. So here we have drip irrigation, but you see how the soil is saturated. And so when this soil is saturated, those plants are going to die. Here's a shot of carrots in a poorly drained soil that's saturated, and you see how they're starting to yellow. And so realize the symptoms for too much water are the exact same symptoms as for not enough water. So here we have too much water, and it's causing these plants to die. And so if you have too much water in your soil, the plant can't take up water, can't take up nutrients. And so you have to walk a fine line there of when you're looking at nutrition and water so that you have your water situation right so your plants can take up both the water and the nutrition. You know, the other thing that amazes me at times is people forget about the influences of weeds. So, they call you up and they say, well, I need fertilizer on my crop of peas here. But in reality, you have the weeds here, they're getting the fertility that's in the field. And so realize that weeds are going to take away from the fertility that your crop can potentially get. Weeds are a big issue. And so weed control needs to be a primary part of your situation so that then your plants can get the nutrients they need. And so weed control, number one in a sound production program. Realize also environment has a great influence on how these plants perform. And sometimes you may think that's a fertilizer issue, but in reality, it's environmental. Like these tomatoes in cages with the plastic wrap. You create a greenhouse situation, and these plants tend to outgrow these probably 2 to 1. So here is caged with plastic, non-caged. And so here is the difference in plant growth. And so you see, you get a bigger plant here, and you may equate that to nutrition, but in reality, all that was an environmental situation there. So that can influence the fertility as well. Last thing is, we think about cool season crops as not needing, say, warmth to make them grow well. So in the spring, a lot of times we use plastic to warm up the soil and get better growth. Well, here is a cool season crop. This is spinach growing on plastic covered beds. Here are spinach plants. This is the same variety here with not plastic, and see the difference in growth there. And same is true here. And so a lot of times we think about temperature on warm season crops, but it can be have an effect on cool season crops as well. But this is a purely environmental and not a nutritional aspect. And so we need to keep those things in mind, that there's other things that influence the way plants respond to nutrition. One of the challenges that we have is a lot of times people tend to maybe fertilize too much. And so you got to realize that excess fertilizer can create a bad situation. You can get too much vigor on your plants, especially on things like black-eyed peas, so that you get all plant and no pods. You can get delayed ripening. Too much nitrogen on tomatoes. I've seen it this year on broccoli plants, where broccoli had excess of fertility, and you get a lot of plant, you get a head, but the head is buried down deep in the plant, and so that can be an issue. Realize phosphorus can be a challenge because it ties up iron and zinc, and so if you over apply phosphorus, that can be a challenge, and so that's why we like to do the soil test. Over the years, there's been a lot of triple 13 thrown out there, meaning that you have the same amount of nitrogen as phosphorus as potassium. And I'm fixing to show you a picture here directly that indicates that plants use these nutrients in ratios. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. Also, you have to realize that plants have to keep these anions and cations in balance. And so these different nutrients have charges, like potassium has plus, calcium has +2, magnesium has a plus. And so if you over apply calcium, then the plant doesn't take up enough of the others. And so keeping it in balance is real important. And so you don't want to do one over another. You want to keep it in balance. And so that's why we encourage you to do the soil test, so that you don't overdo one or the other. As I was telling you a while ago, typically plants use nutrients in a 3-1-2 ratio. 3-1-2 ratio. So here we're looking at ornamental plants, and when you look at the composition of the plant, the percent nitrogen ranges from 2 to 6, percent phosphorus 0.2 to 0.7, percent potassium 1.5 to 3.5. When you look at fruits, very similar numbers. When you look at vegetable crops, very similar numbers. And so when you apply fertilizers, typically we're looking at a 3-1-2 ratio is what you need to be putting out there. Now, if you've never done a soil test, and you don't know what your soil pH is, and your soil pH is high, if you're 7.8 to 8.2, then you may not need this 3-1-2 ratio. But if you know where your soil pH is, if you're 7.5 and below, typically we recommend a 3-1-2 ratio fertilizer initially, and then we'll come back and side dress nitrogen. But we want to get away from this notion of using a 13-13-13. We want to use something more like 15-5-10, because that's in the ratio that these plants are using the nutrients that we're after. So in order to get the most out of our fertilizer application, we need to know which nutrients we need to apply based on our soil test and crop. We need to make timely applications, and we're fixing to talk about that. And we also need to make accurate placement, and that's something that we want to talk about in a little bit more detail as well. Soil type will dictate frequency of application. So realize all soils are not created equal, and you need to know what kind of soil you have. Realize the heavier soils. Here is a Houston black clay type soil. Holds a lot of nutrition. It's a very fertile soil. The challenge you have with these soils obviously is soil drainage. So here we're growing a melon crop on this type of soil. You wouldn't think of that soil as being a very good melon crop soil, but I'm here to tell you that field will roll out the cantaloupes because of the fertility that the soil has. And the only challenge you may have is if the soil gets wet, you may get a little bit of belly rot. But this farmer up in McKinney, Texas, grew Plano County, grew cantaloupe for years and did extremely well with cantaloupe. And like I said, these soils hold a lot of fertility. Whereas a sandier type soil, this is a sandy loam, even some blow sands right here, they're not going to hold nutrition as your heavier soils do. And so you're going to have to side dress these plants a lot more frequently than you will those plants on the blackland type soils. So this is a watermelon crop. We start to side dress them when the vines go to running. This is what we call running. And obviously we're going to put that fertilizer right here. We'll talk about water as moving the fertilizer into the ground here in a second as well. So as a general rule of thumb, when we get ready to fertilize a field, if we're going to plant a crop, we've done a soil test. And so typically what we're going to do is we're going to put out the required phosphorus and potassium before planting. We'll put out usually a quarter to maybe half of the nitrogen. So typically it's like I'm telling you, a 3-1-2 application that we're going to broadcast over the field. Better situation would be to band, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But we don't need to put a lot of nitrogen out here because of that deal I told you about a while ago about burning our roots and pulling the water out of the plants. And so we want to be careful about that. Realize the best way to apply phosphorus and potassium is to band it. And the most ideal placement is 2 inches below the seed. And so realize when you broadcast, you spread it out over the entire field. And when you do that, what you're creating there is a situation where the phosphorus and potassium can get tied up by the calcium, and realize the phosphorus can also tie up the iron and zinc that's in the soil. And so if you can avoid broadcasting, if you have the ability to band, it's far superior to broadcasting. Now I visit with some farmers and they tell me, well, I just don't have time to band it. And so they go ahead and broadcast and band it up. And you know, they make it work. But what I'm here to tell you is if you could broadcast it here with these knives, if you can knife it right into the bed, if you're on 40s, 80s, whatever you're on, if you could do that, that's a much better situation because the phosphorus is going to be right there. Here are these knives. You're putting it right there in the bed, like on a 40-inch bed, probably right down the middle is where you would put it. You're planting 2 lines on a 40, or if you're on 80 with 8 lines on an 80 or 4 lines on an 80 or whatever, you have a pump that's putting out that fertilizer, and so you're going to get a specific amount, and that way you don't have to worry about working that phosphorus and potassium into the soil. If you don't incorporate phosphorus and potassium into the soil, they're not going to move down, especially phosphorus. You know, phosphorus moves very, very little. And so if we can go ahead and incorporate bandit would be ideal. That will be the very best way to do that. Once we have our phosphorus and potassium out there and we get our plants to growing, then we're going to side dress nitrogen. Nitrogen's going to be what's going to make those plants grow. Like we said, frequency and amount dictated by whether we can incorporate or water it in. And realize small, frequent amounts are best. You know, the most ideal situation with nitrogen would be to apply some every week on a weekly basis would be ideal. You know, every week, say you put a little bit of nitrogen in there. It's just like when you buy transplants. Every time those plants are watered, there is fertilizer in that water. And so if you could do the same situation in your field, then that would be a very, very good situation. Now, some of us don't have the ability to apply our fertilizer, our nitrogen, and water it in. Maybe we have to wait on a rain. Maybe we can't incorporate it. And so the challenge that we have to worry with is the volatilization of ammonia when your soil pH is greater than 7.5. If you broadcast it out there and the soil is wet, you're going to lose 50 to 60% of that nitrogen. And so you need to be aware of that. If you're going to broadcast and water it in, make sure the soil is dry before you do that, unless you can turn the sprinklers on right behind you putting out the fertilizer, or if you're applying that fertilizer in a slight rain or mist, etc. When you look at nitrogen fertilizer choices, basically you have 4. You have ammonium sulfate, you have ammonium nitrate, you have urea, and you have N32 or UAN. And realize N32 is a combination of urea and ammonium nitrate. The most available fertilizers on the market today typically are ammonium sulfate, urea, and N32. This one here is very hard to get because of the incident that happened in Oklahoma. So when you're looking at ammonium sulfate, typically you can buy ammonium sulfate cheaper, but realize it's only 21% nitrogen. So if you spread out 100 pounds of ammonium sulfate per acre, you're putting out 21 pounds of nitrogen over that acre. Whereas with ammonium nitrate, 33%, 33 pounds, and then urea is 42 to 45 pounds of nitrogen over that acre when you put out 100 pounds. And so typically when you do the math, urea is a better choice to buy because you're getting more nitrogen per dollar spent. And so you want to investigate that when you're investigating these different fertilizers. The other one that we talked about is N32. It is a liquid product. It's only 32% nitrogen. It's derived from urea and ammonium nitrate. The reason we like ammonium nitrate is ammonium nitrate is a stable fertilizer source when placed on the soil. And so if you had your choice, you can broadcast ammonium nitrate and you're not going to lose it to volatilization. And so that's why it's nice to have this in the mix. So you have, realize one gallon of N32 weighs 11 pounds. So it's 11 pounds of weight per gallon, but it's only 32% nitrogen. So 11 times 0.32 means you get 3.5 pounds of nitrogen per gallon of N32. And so those are the numbers that you can use to figure out exactly how many pounds you're applying per acre when you put out this liquid. So they make several injection systems. I mean, you can get an injection system that's run off the water. Here's a small, simple one that you can buy that you can use. There's Venturi systems. There's pumps where you're pumping the water into the line. And so if you can inject your fertilizer into your lines, you can probably save a quarter to about a half the amount of fertilizer that you may need. So if you can inject it into these drip lines, realize with drip irrigation, you're putting the water right where the plant needs it. So that means the nutrition is growing right there as well. And so drip incorporated into the water, fertilizer into the water is a very, very good system and one that we like a lot. I mean, here's a situation where we're growing high value crops. This is lettuce. You know, typically we don't try to grow head lettuce in Texas, but if you can grow head lettuce, it tends to get bitter, but if you can grow it, it's a high value crop and you can't afford to spend the dollars on the drip and developing a fertilizer injection system so that you can put the fertilizer exactly where the plants need it. So the next topic that we want to talk a little bit about are foliar fertilizers. And you know, there's been a lot of talk, there's a lot of people advocate for foliar fertilizers, but what I'm here to tell you is it's impossible to supply a significant portion of the macronutrient needs of most plants with foliar fertilizers. So realize plants have macronutrients and they have micronutrients. And so a while ago, we told you there's 16 nutrients that you need. And so about half of them are macronutrients. And so the plant needs a large amount of them. And so the big three are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, then calcium and magnesium. And so those are the big macros. And for you to try to put those on a leaf and get them into the plant, it's almost impossible, almost impossible. And so there's a lot of people that spend a lot of money on foliar fertilizers, and you're really not getting the bang for your buck. I know a lot of people use triple 13 as a foliar fertilizer. And in my mind, they're wasting their money with that particular product, because you're only going to get a little bit of nitrogen in and very little phosphorus and potassium. Now, the one thing that the triple 13 does in your spray tank is it helps lower the spray pH, and that's good. That's good. I mean, a lot of these different products that you use to control insects and diseases are pH sensitive. And so if you can lower the water pH, that will be a good thing. But what you have to realize is when you apply a nutrient on a leaf, and I tell most people that the good Lord designed leaves to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to capture light. You know, that's what leaves were developed for. They're designed to capture light. They're not designed to take up nutrients. Now, the thing about it is, though, you can get a little bit in. But the challenge to getting these nutrients into the leaf is you have to penetrate the cuticle. And the cuticle is that waxy layer on top of a leaf that keeps it from drying out. So without that, if you did not have this cuticle out there, the leaves basically would just burn up. So it's got to penetrate the cuticle. It has to move through the apoplast. And then you have to have absorption on the membrane surface. And then you have to have transport into the leaf cells. And so this is a complicated process. It's not as easy as it sounds. You know, you hear all these commercials about Miracle-Gro and spraying the leaves and all that. But what I'm here to tell you is, if it was simple, anybody could do it. And so just spraying it on the leaves doesn't mean that it's going to go in. So like I told you, cuticle is a major limiting factor to entry. Realize you do have the stomates, and y'all have all heard the talk about the stomates. The stomates are the openings on the leaves. They open, and when they open, water vapor goes out into the atmosphere, and CO2 comes in, and then the plant's able to use CO2 in the photosynthetic process. And so stomates are real important for plants, but realize you lose a tremendous amount of water. About 90% of the water that plants use is lost via the stomates. So stomates, when they're open, you do get some entry of these foliar fertilizers in there. You also have vein areas. Realize if you're going to use a foliar fertilizer, you want to spray the very young leaves, the very immature leaves. They don't have a fully developed cuticle yet, and so you're going to be able to get some more in. The key is that you don't have a very strong solution. It needs to be dilute so that you don't burn these leaves. You know, you can always tell when you're getting stuff into a plant, when you see leaf burn, that's not necessarily a good thing. You want to get the nutrients in without causing the leaf burn. These leaves also have trichomes. These are hairs. And so when that solution beads up in these trichomes, there are little hairs there that the solution can bead up there, and it's going to stay wet longer. And so you will get better absorption. And so the key role in absorption of foliar fertilizers is keeping the droplet wet for a long period of time. And so the best time to apply a foliar fertilizer, a nutrient that you're trying to get into the plant, is when you have a fog or a drizzle or a heavy dew, because the plant leaves are extremely wet. And so what you want to do is you want to keep that solution wet for an extended period of time. And so when you're doing this, you do not want to use surfactants. Surfactants are soaps typically, and they lower the surface tension of water. And what they do is they cause the water to spread out over the leaf. And when the water spreads out over the leaf, it dries extremely fast. And that's not what you want. And so you need to not use these surfactants if you're trying to get foliar fertilizers into plants. A fun thing that you can try sometimes is to mix up 2 tablespoons of a liquid Dawn or dishwashing soap into a sprayer. And when you have a heavy dew on your plants, go out there and spray those plants with that soap solution and see how the water slicks off the leaves. It's just amazing how it slicks off. And so when you're looking at drying plants out, a way you can dry them out, I mean, if you're having disease issues, is to use a surfactant to shed some of the water. But when you're trying to get stuff into the plant, you don't want to use a surfactant because it's going to dry extremely fast. So it's my thinking that foliar fertilizers are best used to supply micronutrients. So if you have an iron deficiency or you have a zinc deficiency, those are nutrients that you can get into the leaf. Now, with pecans, other crops, a lot of times we may put a little bit of nitrogen with that solution because the nitrogen tends to promote absorption. But as far as getting nitrogen in, you get a very limited amount in as a foliar fertilizer. Now, there's other things that affect nutrition as well. We talked some about the environment can affect it. We talked about weeds infecting the environment. But also when you incorporate things into your soil, you can create a soil environment that's not favorable to plant growth. So here is a raised bed. These are strawberries. And in my mind, these strawberries are tremendously hungry, tremendously hungry. So there's 2 issues that could be causing this problem. One is, actually maybe 3. One is there's absolutely no fertilizer applied here, which is not the case. They did apply fertilizer. Second thing could be is it's a poorly drained situation. So if you have a poorly drained situation, the plants can't take up the nutrients. But in this situation, what happened is they incorporated non-fully composted bark mulch. And so that bark mulch has not been broken down. And so what's happening is the microbes in this soil are robbing the nitrogen in the soil to try to break down the bark mulch. And so basically the nitrogen is totally tied up in the soil and the plants can't access it. And so that's something that we need to be aware of when we incorporate certain things, that we create a soil environment where the microbes are using the nitrogen for our crop. So a lot of times we have situations and maybe we have applied the fertilizer, but it's just not available to the plant for other reasons. One of the last things that I would consider that you need to do is you need to think about checks or controls when you're doing fertilizer practices. Just because your neighbor uses it does not mean it's going to work. And a lot of people say, well, it just costs me $1 or $2 per acre, but you have 30 acres. So that adds up if you're spraying, 6 times a year. And how can you recommend it when it might help? And so I would really, really caution you and encourage you that when you use a new product, don't treat your entire field. Do a half a row and leave a half a row that you don't treat. Make sure that this $1 or $2 that you're spending is doing some good. I get amused at what I call snake oil products at times. Humic acid. Humic acid has been touted for years. And the amount that they tell you to apply on some of these products is like a quart per acre. A quart per acre. There's 43,560 feet in an acre. And you're putting 1 quart over that entire acre. It's like taking a teaspoon of salt and putting it into the ocean. So you need to be aware of that. You need to check these things out. Don't assume that it's going to work. And so if you check these things out, you leave a check or a control, then you're going to know, yeah, this money that I'm spending here is doing me some good. I had a situation where I was working with some organic farmers. We were trying to grow organic spinach. And so they were applying compost, and then they were coming back with chicken pellets. And I said, well, we need to use a check on the compost, because they started using compost on their conventional acres. And they put it on all the acres, and I could not give them to leave a check. And so they never really knew that that compost was doing any good. Today in their organic operation, they've gone away from the compost, and all they're using is the chicken pellets. And so I'm really telling you, it's real important to check yourself out. Don't assume that just because you heard good things that it's going to be absolutely the greatest thing that you've ever applied to your fields. So my last picture is this one, and then we'll stop and take questions. Is you need to maintain a good soil water environment. I mean, you can't have too much water. You have to have oxygen, so you want to avoid the really wet, dry situations. A lot of times we have good soil moisture, and then we get critically wet, too wet. And so that's a nice thing with drip irrigation is you can apply water on almost a daily or every other day basis. And so you keep a very uniform water situation, which is very applicable to good plant growth. You want to do a soil test about every 3 to 5 years, not something that you need to do every year. I mean, you need to get good baseline data, and then as you add nutrients, as you add compost or whatever, you're going to build up your soil. And so you're going to create a situation where you may not need certain things. So about every 3 to 5 years will get you where you're at on your baseline. Avoid high amounts of nutrients. Don't just sling out a slug of stuff out there. Small, frequent amounts are far superior to a large lump sum of a nutrient. If possible, ban phosphorus and potassium is what I meant to say there for most efficient use. If you can ban nitrogen, when you side dress, that's good too. But also if you can incorporate this nitrogen into your water, if you can inject it into your water, you're going to get a lot better use of nitrogen than if you just sling it out there. And lastly, only use foliar fertilizers to correct micronutrients. Don't go overboard on these foliar fertilizers, because I really think you spend a lot more money than you get good out of that particular situation. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and we will go ahead and open it up for any questions that you may have.
All right, thanks, Dr. Stein. That was great.
Thank you.
We have any questions?
Do you recommend humic acid for just like a larger scale? Like if you were put it on your cornfield, would that be useful?
So the question is about humic acid. Would I recommend using it on a cornfield? And I personally would not. I would not spend the money on humic acid. I would do a soil test. I would put out the recommended situation. I would side dress nitrogen when you cultivate it, and see how that comes out. If I was going to try humic acid, I would want to leave a check. But no, I have not seen a tremendous amount of benefit from humic acid, and we've put it out on a lot of different crops. Typically, it has not made that much of a difference.
Okay, because well, never mind.
Uh-oh. Are you having trouble, Andrew? I think we lost him.
Hey, I have a question. What should you do if you did put that mulch in your bed?
Okay, the question is about the uncomposted bark mulch in the bed. What do we do to counteract that? What you need to do is you need to apply nitrogen, high rate of nitrogen, to try to break down that mulch. And it may be that you have to avoid that bed for a year or two so that it totally breaks down, and then it should be okay again. In that raised bed situation, it may be a situation where they take that out, start over. We have a lot. One more time, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said also I have a very high alkaline content here in the soil and in the water. So does the ammonium sulfate help with that?
That is correct. You have a high pH, so it means you have a lot of calcium, and so ammonium sulfate over time will help with lowering soil pH. But if you're extremely high, it's not going to help that much. So organic matter helps, but you got to realize the only way it's going to help is if the organic matter you apply comes from an acid soil, acid area. So if you,
It's working. Yeah, it's working okay.
good.
It's growing vegetables.
Usually vegetables can tolerate high pH. High pH is not that big an issue except for like beans. Bean crops have an issue, and then you have to side dress iron chelate, EDDHA. But other vegetable crops, typically high pH is not an issue.
All right.
We've got a question in the chat from Robert. He says, what is the ideal composition of soil for raising vegetables?
And so I assume we're talking nutrition, or we could be talking soil, oxygen, water properties as well. So typically, an ideal situation would be have 50% pore space, and 25% of that would have water if we're looking at the composition of the soil itself, is what I would say.
Okay.
My question was also on pH and solubility of the nutrients. Our soil and water here is 7.4, 7.8. I don't attempt to grow plants that are so-called acid loving, but I wonder about accumulating certain elements in the soil in my beds because the pH is so high.
And so I'm not 100% sure your question.
Okay, if I'm accumulating iron, for instance, the other person asked about using the sulfate,
Right?
ammonium sulfate. That would help?
That does help lower soil pH. That's correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
so that would be my help with my pH issue here.
Yeah.
And your direction to put the phosphorus and potassium 2 to 3 inches below where the seeds are going to be would also help, since they're not terribly water soluble to start with.
That is correct.
Okay,
Exactly right.
thank you.
Exactly right. You're fortunate. 7.4 is not a bad pH. When you get above 7.8 is usually when we see the big issue. So you're right there at the borderline. So ammonium sulfate should help you keep it down. So that's
Thank
good.
you.
You bet.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Stein, I'll ask one for, we've done a little bit of this in our Master Gardener demo garden with foliar testing for nutrients. Do you recommend that? How often would be good? That would be more in a commercial setting, but can you talk a little bit about that?
So when you say foliar testing, I mean, you're testing to see if they work, or?
Yeah, just for nutrients, for fertility. Mm-hmm.
So which ones have you applied?
We did it for tomatoes And oh goodness, it's been a while. But it did help to know how much nitrogen we needed to add. It was kind of interesting.
So, I mean, what you're saying is you saw an effect from applying them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yeah, foliar fertilizers can help, but I only see.
Oh no, foliar testing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
My brain was in the wrong place.
yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, you can fine tune things with testing nutrients, absolutely. And there's people in certain parts that swear by doing that. I mean, I would do it limitedly, and maybe if you're having issues, but I wouldn't go overboard on it.
Okay.
One year, I worked with a pecan grower, and we sampled his leaves every 2 weeks. And so he was trying to apply based on what he was getting back. It didn't work. And so in your situation, I mean, I'm saying maybe once or twice, once a year, so that you know how you did is good. I don't think doing it more than that is necessary.
Okay.
So yeah, foliar testing for nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good practice. Good practice, absolutely.
All right, I don't see any more questions.
I'd like to ask a question if y'all can hear me clearly.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Dr. Stein, have you noticed any of these additives that are recommended for root development or enhancement or anything like that to be effective or worthwhile?
I have not seen any of the different root ones that I can say did a great deal of good. We worked with some mycorrhiza a few years ago and did a randomized replicated trial and put it out there. And it turns out that when you fertilize, typically the mycorrhiza didn't do any good. Now I know there's other root additives as well, but in all the stuff I've done, I've never seen a benefit to using them.
I've used some gibberellic and have noticed a little bit of a bonus from that. Have you done any studies to see if it is really significant or if it's
so when
it's
you
worthwhile?
use gibberellic acid, though, you were spraying the plant, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, we see that on certain crops, like on
Strawberries and cantaloupes.
One more time, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. On strawberries and cantaloupes, we
Okay.
have noticed difference.
Yeah, you do get some benefits with gibberellic acid on certain crops. No question about it. Spinach, you get more upright growth, so it's easier to cut. So, I mean, different crops, there is a benefit for using those. I have not used it on strawberries or cantaloupe, though.
We've got one more question in the chat. Should I do soil testing before planting pecans? What would be the best soil composition for planting pecans?
I would do a soil test for pecans just to see what you got. The main thing about a soil composition for pecans is that it drains well. And so we tell you to do the post hole test, 8 to 10 inches wide, 3 feet deep if you have 3 foot of water, 3 foot of soil. Pour in 5 to 7 gallons of water and see how long it takes to drain out. We want the hole to be empty in less than 12 hours. And you want to do this when the soil is wet. So soil drainage is the most important key for pecans.
All right. Well, we'll take a quick break before our next speaker at 11 if you need to run, get another cup of coffee or something. So thank you, Dr. Stein. Appreciate you being on here today. Learned a lot. Thanks.
Absolutely. Y'all have a great day.
Hey, Blake, thanks for joining us this morning. Blake, if you're there, we can go ahead and get your presentation shared. There you are.
Sounds good. I will go on and can you hear me just fine?
Sure can.
All right. And here we go. I've got it up, and can you see it?
I can see it. It looks like,
I hadn't started the slideshow.
okay,
yet.
yep, perfect.
Can you see
All right.
that?
Yeah.
All right.
How are you doing this morning?
Doing all right. How about you?
Doing well. Yeah.
Is it going smooth?
Yeah, I think so. No, no hiccup so far on technology, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. That's always nice.
Yeah.
Don't worry, there's still time left in the day.
Right.
So
It's fun.
for the afternoon session, was I supposed to register for that one as well?
Yeah, there was an afternoon part.
Okay.
But
All right. I'm guessing I
should
can go in and
be-
I can register for that after we
yeah,
get done.
I think if you just hop back on the link, Brent can put you in the right room when you
Okay.
hop on. Yeah.
All right. I'll make sure that I've registered. If not, I'll go in and register for the afternoon session
Okay.
so that I can get in.
Well, we've got a couple of our committee members who are growers who will be in on that, talk
Okay.
about their experience. So it should be good.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Now, how long do I have this morning? 45 minutes?
Yeah, 45 to an hour. Hmm.
Okay, good. Because
Yep.
I've got that dictates how many stories I tell.
Okay.
Because I've got marketing stories, things that interested me, that drew me in. So
Right.
that tells me how much I can go off and chase rabbits.
Right. You can chase some rabbits today. Yeah.
All right. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
we'll break for lunch at noon, and then I think we come back at, oh, I should know this, 1 or 1:30, and they'll do a scholarship presentation and keynote speaker, and then we'll hop back into the group for the afternoon panel.
Sounds good.
Yep. Usually we get a really good lunch out of this, so you got to scrounge up your own today.
Yeah, you got to spread your own ham sandwich.
That's right.
Or peanut butter.
Yeah, that's one downside to Zoom. You might can stay in your pajamas, but you don't get lunch.
An upside is I've done one where we did it on Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
So we did Taco Tuesday with margaritas. And so everybody mixed their own margaritas and
There
made
you
their own
go.
tacos. And we sat there during the meeting We had tacos and margaritas.
No need to go to Fuzzies. You can just have it there.
That's exactly right. You know, we can't serve margaritas in an extension program, but
That's
hey,
right.
you know, you can make your own.
You know, we're back in the county office. It's just not the same.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, I miss being in front of people.
Yeah. Yep. It's a lot more fun.
This is good. It allows you to branch out and really, you know, hit a lot of people and do a lot of different things, but at the same time, it's not the same.
Nope, it's not. We get into this for the people. So,
Yeah.
yep. All right. Well, it looks like we're at 11 o'clock. So I'll let you go ahead and get started. We can introduce you real quick. Everybody, this is Dr. Blake Bennett. He's an associate professor and extension economist. So one of those economist guys, and we're glad to have him today. He's out of the Dallas Research and Extension Center, which is a beautiful place now with all of the renovations and work that they've done up there. Focuses on farm and ranch management analysis and production economics with a specialty on marketing, budgeting, and computerized record keeping. So we've asked him to talk today about small acreage horticulture marketing. So whether that's farmers markets or pick your own, or if you're trying to, you know, maybe market your crop to restaurants or whatever, he'll hit some of those strategies. And again, put your questions in the chat. I think we should have some time at the end for answering those questions. And then also try to stick around for the panel discussion this afternoon. We're going to focus a lot on that. We'll have some growers who can share their experiences and answer questions from their perspective too. So with that, I'll let you take the wheel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on and, you know, listening in on some of the other presentations this morning. You know, I can tell you some strategies on selling it, not really focused now on growing it. This is maybe even before you grow it, some of the things that you can think about. And even if you're looking at diversifying what you have, some strategies to look at. How do we market the products that we sell or that we grow? And there is a difference between just selling and marketing. Selling a product, you're focused really on the producer. It's producer driven. I'm going to produce it. Now, where can I sell it? The short-term goal here is closing the deal. And the business really thinks about this after the production has been completed. It's grown, now where can I sell it? That can create some problems, especially for products such as that you grow in horticulture. They're perishable products, and so finding a market to sell into can create some problems. And I've got some stories there as we move through this presentation. Marketing, on the other hand, it's a lot wider of a focus. It's dynamic. You're thinking about the customer first. What does the customer need? How can I fulfill that need? Marketing, it involves planning, it involves pricing, promoting, as well as distribution. It's all of those channels. So there is a huge difference between just selling a product and actually marketing it. I'm going to jump off right here and just look at some of the things that some successful marketers have done. And let's start with Walmart. You know, Walmart, they were one of the first companies that put in a computerized system, not only to track products that they were selling, but also track consumers themselves. And they really know us. In fact, Walmart probably knows us better than we know ourselves. Whenever we walk through the door, they know the customer. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they know how to market to us. Case in point, Walmart creates a lot of data based on sales. And they'll match these sales up and try to explain why. What major event drove these sales? We just got through with one with toilet paper. Walmart knew exactly why, and everyone knew exactly why the shelves were empty with toilet paper during the early days of COVID-19. However, way back in 2004, Hurricane Charlie hit Florida, and Walmart started analyzing their data. They found that people were buying batteries and flashlights ahead of the storm. Well, that makes sense. It makes sense that someone's going to be buying batteries and flashlights before a hurricane hits. We're going to be without electricity. Walmart also noticed that consumers bought Pop-Tarts and beer. And not just any Pop-Tarts, but strawberry Pop-Tarts ahead of the hurricane. So this was one that kind of, they stepped back and said, why? But really, they didn't care why, they cared that. So they looked at the consumer and they said, okay, they're going to be buying batteries, they're going to be buying flashlights, they're going to be buying strawberry Pop-Tarts, and they're going to be buying beer. So the next time a hurricane was headed for Florida, they watched the weather reports. Walmart flooded the market with strawberry Pop-Tarts, beers. Also, they flooded it with batteries and flashlights, and they raked in profits. They watched the consumer. They listened to the consumer and said, this is what we want. So that's what Walmart went after, and they cashed in on it. So taking this down, we can learn something from this. And first we need to look at, is it selling or is it marketing? Here I have a picture of the Dallas Farmers Market. And I also have a picture on the right of a pick your own for strawberries. And the question I have is this selling or is this marketing? Well, it depends. It depends on your actions. It depends on what you're doing. You can just be a seller at a farmer's market or even at a pick your own. Or you can be a marketer at either one of these. It depends on your actions that you take. So I have two pictures here, and I ask, can you spot the differences or the major difference? Well, the major difference here is you have a watermelon that's cut in half and it has a knife in it. That tells me as I'm walking by this truck, you're going to be offering samples. You're going to let me sample what you have to offer. That is the start of marketing. That's one component. So yes, the person on the right is actually started to marketing. The person on the left, somewhat, we'll get into it, but there's a key ingredient there with the watermelon that's cut in half. Think about yourself whenever you walk into a store. What drew you to that store itself? Why did you go into that store? What experiences do you have whenever you walk into that particular store? What feelings does the store give you? Is it a feeling of calm and inviting and homey? Or is it a big warehouse? Does it create a sense of urgency? Think about the senses. Think about your smells, what you hear, what you can touch. All of those are part of this marketing scheme. You know, there's a reason at grocery stores that the florist is put up front is because flowers put us in a good mood. And whenever we're in a good mood, we buy more. So where things are located in a grocery store has a reason because it gives us different senses. Think about that as you start to market, as you go to, if you're trying to hit that final consumer, what are they looking for? What senses are they trying to get? What draws you, once you're in the store, what draws you to a particular item? There's a whole science associated with how we behave whenever we're in a store. Use that research. It's easy to find on the web, but you can use that research to help drive your own sales. And I've got some results in here that I'm going to present that'll show you what different farmers market studies have shown, what they see whenever we look at Pick Your Own, what consumers are looking for, what drives them. Here's two very different experiences of two different stores. No, they're not agricultural products. They're actually wedding dresses. On the left-hand side, the left picture, we've got a store in Boston called Filene's. And they do an event called Running of the Brides, where all the brides are outside and then they open up the door and they run to the racks because all these dresses are drastically slashed in prices. And they'll run over each other. There's fights that'll break out. These brides are they're scrambling to try and get these dresses. On the right-hand side, we've got Kleinfeld's in New York. And that's where Say Yes to the Dress is filmed. That's an all-day event where, you know, family members come and the bride tries on all these dresses, and it's not a lot of brides. You have to make an appointment to go in, and it's an all-day event. It's a very special event. It's very calm. It's very relaxing. There's couches set up all around. Both of them have different experiences that they're trying to give the consumer. Both of them are marketing. Both of them are very targeted towards what they're trying to market. But the similarities here is that both are focused on the consumer and what the consumer wants to experience whenever they're buying that product. The same thing can be translated over to us selling agricultural products whenever we're trying to go to that final consumer. The consumer is looking for an experience. So ask yourself, what are your consumers actually feeling? What are their senses? What's triggering them? What are the experiences that they have whenever you have a farmer's market stand? What experiences are they having whenever they stop by your stand? What do they feel? What do they sense? What do they want to convey to you? How can you use these? How can you influence these consumers? How can you use some techniques to influence these experiences, these senses, these feelings? Because you can influence them. For instance, vertical signage outside of a booth, just signs that are vertical. Our eyes have a tendency to move horizontally. Whenever something is vertical, it disrupts that. And whenever we're disrupted, well, we turn our attention to it. Everything going as normal as planned, we don't see it. For instance, my daughter, she walks by her clothes that are in the floor every single day. And she doesn't notice that the clothes are in the floor. If they get picked up, suddenly it's like, whoa, what happened? You cleaned up my room. It's disrupted her daily flow. Same thing with the sign. Simply putting something vertically disrupts our attention and we notice it. Create bounty. Create a feeling that there's a lot of it there. Fewer items in a farmer's market stall says that everything's been picked over. We're going to avoid that because everyone's already gotten the best ones out there. If everything's bountiful, we think, oh boy, look, there's a lot here. It's fresh. It's new. It hadn't been sitting there all day. Consolidate items. Use inserts in crates. If you'll notice, whenever you go to farmers markets, and here we have on the bottom picture, there's a box full of peaches. That box is not full of peaches all the way to the bottom. They've used an insert in there to pull those peaches up to the top. Because think about it, if you're going to buy that box, all of them are going to fall out on the way to the car. No, they're going to pull that insert out, and those peaches are going to drop down in the box so that they're level with the top. Then you can carry them. But in order to display them, they put the insert in there to raise them up, make it look like you're getting just this box that's overflowing with peaches. It creates a mountain effect. Use color. Color really influences our senses. Also, a tiered system. Create blocks. Set up your stand so that it looks like stairs. Create color blocks as well. If you will change up use a tiered system, it draws our eye to it. For instance, the picture on the left, they use color schemes in there, and they use a tiered system to try and make it so that our eyes are slowly making their way upstairs. Even in the bed of a pickup, you can use a tiered system as well as colors to try and draw your eye. Even notice how I used a tiered system just in how I presented these pictures. They're on different levels. So it draws your eye from one to the other. Think about your natural tendencies just to look at pictures and how it flows. You may not just read left to right. Chances are you zoomed in on the picture that was the lowest in the beginning, and then you worked your way up. You either went left because the picture was smaller on the left, or you went right because the picture was the biggest. The chances are you started in the middle. So I was influencing even how you looked at the pictures that I presented. Looking at a farmer's market research study. Participating growers, they wanted to move more potatoes. So all they did is they used an insert at the back of each one of the boxes of potatoes, and they lifted them up a little bit and moved them forward. They saw an 11% increase in sales. Just by putting, it can be anything. It could be a wrench in the back of your truck that you push underneath the back of that carton that lifted them up a little bit in the back and moved them forward so that they're facing the consumer. 11% increase. Color's huge, and there's all kinds of research on color. And what they found out is yellow, that's the one that people can spot. They spot it from far away. There's been studies on the use of yellow trays with donuts. Whenever donuts are on yellow trays, they sell out quicker. And so you'll see a lot of stores that'll try and use yellow behind their donuts. Parchment paper is another one behind it. It's not just to keep that tray clean. It's because you have a breakup in the color. But yellow, it's warm, it's happy. It gives us a sense of cheerfulness and playfulness. It puts us in a good mood. It stimulates our mental activity. It helps us make a decision. Just the color yellow helps us make decisions. You can use signage with yellow backgrounds to help you make decisions. You can put bright squash if you want to feature things around it, because our eyes are going to be drawn to yellow. Move the squash to different areas of your booth or your stall that you want to feature. Be careful here though. Dark yellow, it's the sign of a cynic or a complainer. So bright yellow, okay. Dark yellow, not so much. Lighter yellow, that says you don't really have that much confidence. And large quantities of yellow, that creates anxiety, nervousness, critical judgment. So be careful how much yellow you use, but use it. Signage. I mentioned putting your signs on yellow. Signage is critical. Whether you're looking at farmers markets, roadside stand, or you're looking at pick your own, signage is key. The signs need to be simple. They need to be durable so that you can use them over and over again, because cost is a factor here. and they need to inform the consumer exactly what you're trying to say. Nothing irritates me more than to walk into a store and not be able to find out what is the price of the item that I'm looking at, because all the signage has been moved around or it's been knocked off, it's gone. And oftentimes I'll put it back because I don't know what it is. I don't want to have to go up and try and check out, and then they tell me what the price is. Well, I don't want it. I'll just put it back on the shelf. So signage is key. Research results said that a producer was using index cards and a Sharpie to produce signs and making them out every single day because it's written on cardboard. They simply created laminated tags with the farm's logo, with a product description, and clear pricing. Consideration for purchases increased by 17% in this farmer's market study. Just the consumer considering more, I'll buy that product just because the sign was effective. It didn't take much, just took a little bit of effort, but you increase that consumer considering, yes, I'm going to buy, or no, I'm not, by 17%. Sensory appeal. Consumers expect to touch, to smell, and to taste products whenever you go to a farmer's market. It's just like going into Sam's at lunch. In college, I would go into Sam's at lunch. I had a Sam's card. I'd go in there because I was broke and I wanted to eat. But chances are I was going to buy something whenever I tasted, whenever I smelled it cooking, whenever I tasted the food. I was more apt to buy those products. So have samples available. Also have signs indicating that these are free samples. Maybe stand outside your stall, have cut samples for customers. Think back to the early days whenever Chick-fil-A was just in malls, and you had an employee standing outside with the tray with all the Chick-fil-A samples with the toothpick stuck in them, and everybody would flock to them to try and get the free samples. A lot of them stopped and bought that product. I had a very good friend in college that her and her husband ended up opening up a Chicken Express in Plainview. And whenever they were first starting, it was a struggle to get business. And she told me one day that a bus stopped next to them and let off all these kids. And they were walking across their property to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, she grabbed a bunch of the chicken strips and cut them up real quick, threw them on a tray, and went outside. And she started giving away samples to all these kids. Half of them turned into their store just because of the free sample. They said, hey, this is good. I want some. Give out recipe cards also. Free samples doesn't have to mean just the product itself. Find recipes that you enjoy for the product that you produce and give those out. Whether you buy my product or not, here's a recipe card. Have your logo on that recipe card. Branding is important. But give out those recipe cards, because if they have that recipe and they see this is how simple it can be, indicate how much time it's going to take. Quick 10-minute meal using tomatoes. And then they're going to have your logo. They're going to see how quick it can be. You know what? That sounds good for tonight. So I'm going to buy some tomatoes from you. Tell your farm story on the signage. I cannot stress this enough. The stand is a direct reflection of your brand. Customers are there because they want to know your story. They want to know, why am I buying from you? I've been to farmers markets and I've asked them, what is your farm story? Well, they said, well, I'm just a broker. I buy these products in Tennessee and I've driven them down to Dallas. Well, I'll go on to the next stall. I want to know your farm story. I want to know what I'm buying. I want to know who I'm buying it from. Where did this come from? Why did you decide to produce this product? What makes your product unique? They want the whole experience. Are you a fourth generation farmer? I show a picture here, Paul Bonarigo. He started Messina Hoff Winery in College Station. And Paul is the epitome of marketing. This picture of him in this red suit with this red cap, that's not just for this picture. Anywhere he goes, he matches his cap with his coat, with his pants, and they're always these bright colors. Whenever he walks into a room, you know Paul's here. Paul even had business cards. You know, he's got his Messina Hoff Winery, Paul Bonarigo, that on the back, he uses it at restaurants to market his product. If he sits down at a restaurant and he looks at the wine list, if there's not a Texas wine on the list, not just Messina Hoff, but a Texas wine, the backside of his business card says, this meal was excellent, but it would have been better if you would have had Texas wine on the menu. So he's telling that restaurant, he's marketing not just his product, but Texas wines. You know, when you flip that card over, it's Messina Hoff, and it's saying, hey, if you want Texas wines on your menu, give me a call. He's marketing his product. He's marketing his brand everywhere he goes. So think in those terms. Every bit of signage, everything that is handed out needs your brand on it. Everything that you sell needs your brand. That is marketing. Customer service. Cannot say how important this is enough. Just go into a store that you know is known for customer service. For instance, Nordstrom's. Go into Nordstrom's. Watch how they engage their customers and then copy it. You can copy how they engage their customers. Now, Nordstrom's, the classic example that they use in marketing classes is Nordstrom's back, say in the 1980s, they were known for the customer's always right no matter what. And a customer brought in snow tires into Nordstrom's and said, these didn't work right. I want to return them. Nordstrom sells clothes. They don't sell snow tires. But the customer's always right. So Nordstrom's, return the snow tires. Let him return the snow tires to Nordstrom's. Now, do you have to go that far? No. But the customer always being right, or that level of service, is something that you can copy. Engage each consumer that you come in contact with. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them what they're cooking for tonight. Have you thought about what's for dinner? Well, no, we're stopping and we're gonna eat out. You know, okay. Well, what about tomorrow night? When are you gonna cook next? Have you thought about any new recipes that you may want to try out? I have some simple ones here with products, you know, using products I sell, as well as some that if you're really wanting to get kind of technical and really do a special night, here's some other ones. These are the fancy ones. Did you know that this is the last week of whatever season? That creates a sense of urgency. Well, you know what? I better get asparagus because this is it. It's over after this week. I need to go on and get it now. Oh, you have it. Okay, well, let's buy some. Create that sense of urgency. Create that Filene's running of the bride scenario in a more controlled environment. All of these, if you focus on the consumer, they do increase sales. Again, people are there for experiences as well as items that they purchase. And one of the experiences that they can get is focus on them. People like whenever the focus is on them. They like to talk about themselves. Use that to drive sales. Loyalty cards, they're not just for grocery stores. They can be for your products as well. You know, these loyalty cards, they reward customers for shopping with you on a regular basis. They do create long-lasting relationships. Consumers actually tend to purchase more whenever a loyalty card is in place. Think about a grocery store that's offering, you know, if you have this card, it's 4 for 1. You're going to probably buy 4. I cannot tell you how many times I come home and my wife says, "Why did you buy 6 cases of Dr. Peppers?" I'm like, well, they were on sale. You know, I mean, because I had the loyalty card, you know, I got this great deal and we're going to drink them anyway. So, and she's like, well, we got to store them though. It created a sense of urgency in myself. I knew it whenever I was doing it. I saw it and I loved the concept. So I bought them. Loyalty cards actually, whenever someone has a loyalty card with you, they feel more a part of you, a part of your business. They're going to give you more honest feedback. And that's what you want. You want honest feedback. How can I improve? Research in farmers markets showed that loyalty cards help the livestock producer increase sales per customer by 40%. Because customers wanted to reach that next threshold. They're always looking at, where do I go if I get to this threshold? This is what I get. Well, I want to get there. So I'm going to buy more and more and more. 40%. Make a deal. That's why we go to some of these markets, because we want to strike a deal. The customer wants to feel like that they negotiated something, that they negotiated well. You get the sale. So it's a win-win. Do 2 for 1s. Bundle some sales. You know, maybe bundle up the ingredients for a meal. You know, I have this recipe card and here's actually a bundle ready to go. You buy this sack and it has all the ingredients in it ready to go for the entire thing. All you got to do is add water or, you know, whatever. It's like a boxed meal, but it's fresh foods. Purchasing large quantities. If I buy more, are you going to give me a break on the price? Social media discounts. If you come up and if you show me that you belong to my Facebook page, you follow me on social media, then I'll give you a 10% discount on the price. Just show me that I'm one of your, you follow me. Simple to do. They can register right there. You know what? They can be at the farmer's market and go, woo, yeah, follow. Okay, 10% discount. But it keeps you in the loop and it gives you those contacts. It gives you that relationship. That's what you're looking for. Develop a relationship with the customer. Looking at the layout, very, very important. Have a friend walk by, not yourself, not whoever set up the stand. Don't do it. Have someone else walk by. Ask them what stands out. What do they notice? What draws them to the stand? Does anything draw them to the stand? Do I look different? What is it that repels you? What do you look at my stand and say, whoa, no, I don't want to do that? Then after you make changes, walk by again and do the same thing. There's actually a whole section on Pinterest that's associated with farmers market design for stalls ideas. Here's some examples. I mean, these pictures were taken right from Pinterest. It gives you ideas on how to decorate or design your stall. Use those because they help to draw the eye in. They help create different senses. I mean, the one on the right just used wooden boxes. to put the produce in versus just having it piled up on the table. It creates some order. It creates a different look. That's what you're looking for, a different look. Ask yourself, what directions do the customers approach? Where do they come from? Normally, here we tend to walk on the right side and have people going the other way pass by on our left. That's how we drive cars. So chances are they're going to be coming from your left. But it can help whenever you determine which directions are consumers approaching. It helps you determine where you put your signs, where to put plastic bags that someone may use to, gather up all their products if that's how you're going to run your stall. It can tell you where to put samples. Where do we put the samples? Looking at the navigation. Look at the view of your stall. Are they obstructed? Is there anything that's obstructed? Look at the walkways. Are they obstructed? These obstructions can drive consumers away. They don't want to come into your stall because I can't get around. What about people with backpacks, with strollers, with carts? Can they get in and out of your stall? How do they navigate around your area? Removing obstructions has been found to increase sales by 15%. And those are both visual obstructions as well as physical ones about getting around in your stall. Make observations. While you're there actually at the stall, make observations of consumers. Consumers that are apologizing to each other, that are misplacing, well, where did I put that? Or constantly just looking over your shoulder. If I'm constantly turning and looking over my shoulder, that shows that I'm anxious, and I'm anxious about being in that spot. You don't want that. You don't want them to be anxious about being in your stall. You may need to create some more space. You may need to give them some more elbow room. If customers are asking, what's the price of this? What's the price of that? What's the name of your farm? What is your farm story? You may need to work on your pricing signs as well as your farm, your farm story signage. Also, if consumers are asking you, what's the price of this? What's the price of that? It takes your time away from engaging with other consumers. So you want to engage with them, but not with something that is simple, that they could get on their own. You can communicate with each and every single consumer with signage. Listen to the suggestions that the consumers are giving you. They're telling you, just by being there, they're telling you they want to spend money. They want to give you money. I'm just talking to you, so I want to give you money. For instance, listening to consumers, there was a dairy farmer that was selling at a farmer's market, and they were selling gallon as well as pint-sized containers. They listened to the consumers. Consumers wanted quart sizes as well. Just by offering quart sizes, they increased sales by 15%. If your product is being undersold, it's just not moving like it should. Try moving it to a different location, maybe to a more prominent location in the booth. Maybe put something yellow behind it. Maybe put a yellow tablecloth underneath it. Remember, our eyes are drawn to yellow. Offer deals on that particular product. That can help stir up some sales. Make subtle suggestions. Well, you're going to be making a steak tonight. Have you thought about cooking this with it? That's a good pairing. What do you ever? I don't have a recipe for that. I don't know how to cook that. Oh, well, you're in luck. Here's a recipe card. That can help stir those sales up. Some other issues to think about with farmers markets. Do they require a license? Some do. Particularly, if you're going to sell certain products, they're going to require you to have a license. You need to check those out first. Some require a license if you're going to sell refrigerated products. It's a separate one. Obviously, what's the cost of rental to sell the products? Do the rates change during different times of the year? Some of the more established farmers markets, yes, the rates change based on the time of year. Are there discounts that are given for longer periods of time? And don't forget to ask, I'm an actual farmer. Is there a discount for being an actual farmer? Again, these are things that you do need to consider whenever you're looking at farmers markets. Also consider what type of market it is. As I said, I've got examples of different types of selling versus marketing. And right after I got into the office, I went down to the Dallas Farmers Market and I sat down with the director down there and I talked to him for quite a while, over a couple of days. And I asked him, about how do you sell here? What do you sell here? What are the characteristics? What makes it successful? And what are some of the problems? And one of the issues, and it's an example of selling versus marketing, one of the issues that the director said is that, they're known in the Dallas area. The Dallas Farmers Market is known as the tomato market. Whenever tomatoes are in season here in Texas, in northeastern Texas, we pull them in from local growers. And whenever they're out of season here, then we can move to South Texas and pull it in. Whenever that's done, we can move to Tennessee. Whenever that's done, they actually pull them in from South America. They pull in massive amounts of tomatoes into the Dallas Farmers Market. So they don't need tomatoes. And he said a grower just pulled up one day. He had a semi-truckload full of fresh tomatoes and said, I'm needing to sell these at this market. Dallas Farmers Market told him, I'm sorry, we don't need them. We don't need any tomatoes. Well, the guy panicked. I've got a semi-truckload full of fresh tomatoes. They're going to go bad. Where can I sell them? The closest place that they found was Memphis, Tennessee. So he loaded up, trucked them over there, and actually contacted the Dallas market again and said, I'll never do that again because I earned just enough to pay for my fuel to get there, my trucking to get to Memphis. So that was selling. Take a few extra steps to market. Be careful with those two. Looking at pick your own, some of these same concepts hold true here. They really do. You're focused on the consumer. You are selling a commodity. You obviously are. Pick your own. It is selling a commodity. You should have high quality, but focused on the experience here. That's really what consumers are trying to buy, is the experience of pick your own. Yes, you are selling a commodity along with it, but you're really marketing that experience. Here's some examples of some of the non-traditional pick your own that I've actually sought out and stopped at is, in my travels. The one in the upper left was up in Vermont. And the whole reason that I stopped at this cider mill was one word that I wish I would have come up with. I wish I would have coined the term agritainment. We hear agritourism. Yes, I love the word agritainment because that tells me it's entertainment. And I bought into it. I said, I've got to go see what they're doing. I want to study this. Agritainment just really hooked me. And this place was packed. And it was really just a storefront. I mean, they didn't really, it wasn't a mill anymore. It was a storefront. They had bought all the products. They hadn't grown anything. But that agritainment really hooked me. Upper right-hand corner, that's a pumpkin patch that's right near DFW Airport. They don't grow any pumpkins there. No, they buy them from Floydada and they pull them in. They have a corn maze there. You know, they have hay rides through the pasture, through the ranch that's near DFW Airport. But it's an old family farm that's been swallowed up by the Metroplex, but they still look for that experience. They come out, pick your own pumpkin, you know, run through the corn maze. It is an experience. You will not believe how many kids love to get on the old tractor there. It's an old tricycle tractor, but the kids love playing on that thing. They're all over it. I mean, to me, that was work growing up, but they love that experience. You're going to the farm. Lower right-hand corner, it's my daughter on the left-hand side and her cousin. We were up in New England, and I sought out, and I paid for us three to go out on a boat with the captain that's driving the boat there, and we spent half a day pulling lobster traps. That's what I wanted. I paid for that. I paid to go work. I paid to go out, and trust me, this guy, the winch on his boat was broken. So we had to physically pull those on the pulley, pull the rope, and pull those pods up. Those things were heavy. They were loaded down with lobsters. But you know what? My daughter and her cousin and myself, we learned how to identify male and female lobsters. He let my daughter, who was probably 7 or 8 at the time, he let her measure to say, this one we can legally keep. No, we cannot. We throw these back. He let them throw them back. He let them store the ones that we kept. This is where she did every bit of the work. Both her and her cousin and myself, we baited the new traps and we reset them. We did that for 4 hours. We paid $120 to go out and work for 4 hours on a lobster boat. Now, at the end, we had pulled up so many lobsters that he gave us 15 to take home. So for $120, we got 4 hours of work and we got 15 lobsters to go home, and we cooked them right after we got home. We had a big, huge lobster boil, invited neighbors over. And I mean, those were the best lobsters in the world. Those were great, best we've ever had. And my daughter will always remember that experiences, as will I. It's something that I'm not going to get a chance to do again. I would love to go back up to New England and work in a cranberry bog for a day. Give me a day. Let me go out. Let me help you. Let me work. Let me get that experience. I'm even willing to pay for it. That's what a pick your own is an experience that we're paying for. Now, customers at pick your owns, they will interrupt your flow of work. They will get in your way. Yes, you cannot get a lot done whenever customers are there. They will eat the produce as they're picking. They will go where you tell them not to. They will break branches. They will step on fruit. They will ask the same question over and over and over again. Expect that if you're going to get into a pick your own. Some things to look at. Be welcoming whenever you have a pick your own. Welcome the customers. Start small and then grow. Don't try and start too big. It can overwhelm you. Produce quality products. Produce higher quality experiences. Look for the experience that you can give customers. Manage cost effectively. Yes, absolutely. Create and adhere to standard policies. Everyone, this is the way we run the show here. There's no deviating from it. Here's where you go. Here's where you don't. Here's what you pick. Here's what you don't. Manage safety and liability. People are coming onto your property with pick your own. Liability insurance is going to be a must. Communicate with the customers, absolutely. Supervise them by all means. Build relationships and tell your farm story. At every chance you get, tell your farm story. Have consistent hours. I know exactly when you're going to be there. I know exactly when you're going to be open. It's like clockwork. Be open during regular hours and especially on the weekends. That's where you're going to get your most business. Communicate weather condition closings, or any other related closings through multiple channels. Put it on your webpage, blast it out via your social media. Let them know, hey, we're closed because of XYZ. Know what days and times are the slowest, and that's whenever you get your work done that you have to do on the farm. Diversity. Choose what works best for you. For some, it's just one crop. There was a pick your own apple orchard up in Lubbock, and they did apples, period. Some of them, like that pumpkin patch here in DFW, they buy products, pull them in so that, yes, they grow this, and yes, they have all of these farm fresh. Look at your competition that's near. Can you do something a little bit different than what they are? Maybe it's a compliment to them. That way you can market together. Location and layout. How close are you to a large population? Are there any zoning laws that are on your property that you cannot get into? How do customers come into and exit your property? Big question there. Are there going to be restrooms? Where do you check in? Where do you check out? What are the instructions? Where do I go to start this experience? Give instructions, both written that I can hold, as well as signage around. Pick me, pick me. Give pictures of the pick me. Here's what you're looking at picking. This is ones you don't want to pick. Put up ropes, put up fences, flags, keep customers out of different areas. Ropes and all can help direct us where we go. Parking's a big one. That's going to take up part of your area. You've got to have an area where you could have customers come in. Where will they park? What types of vehicles do you expect? How many do you expect? Do you have enough space? Is it clearly marked where I park? Some of them you may not be able to park on the road. Some of them, yes, you may. Are there handicap spaces available? Are they clearly marked? Is there a smooth pathway leading up to the check-in area? Because, something that's rough, someone could fall and then they could say, well, it's your fault, yada, yada, yada. Are there any easements or restrictions for what you can do? Also realize that a parking lot is probably going to change the property taxes. In other words, you may lose your ag exemption on that part that is the parking lot. So keep that in mind as you're planning. Ask yourself with the pick your own, what makes you different? Is it location? Is it because I'm organic? Is it because it's easy to access? Am I more knowledgeable? Do I provide educational events? What makes me unique? Focus your attention on these unique features. Looking at signage, roadside stands. They need to be able to be seen from a far distance. Something handwritten on notebook paper is not going to work. You need to be able to see it from far off. It needs to have large words on it. Isn't too wordy, because remember, we're driving down the road. We may want to say, hey, let's pull off and stop. I do that all the time. And it points customers in the right direction. Notice these signs here are very large, very few words, and they have arrows pointing you where to go. Social media with Pick Your Own can be very, very important. Creates a customer list, absolutely. You can communicate with customers easily. You can offer discounts for just belonging to it, absolutely. Also, creates a sense of belonging. It gives me a sense that I'm part of your operation. Consider allowing customers to upload pictures of their experience on your social media. Now, of course, you're going to monitor it, but it's like TripAdvisor. Why do we go to TripAdvisor? Because other people are telling us what they think about these locations, and we can see their pictures. Use the same thing with your own social media. Give out flyers to local businesses. Visit the hotels. Give them your flyers. Restaurants, convenience stores, local newspapers. Have them do a human interest story. Host an event. This brings in patrons from the local area, absolutely. Some may not have come out to your place otherwise. It helps to celebrate your farm. And also out-of-towners, they find their way to your farm. And I give the example here of Vermont Farm. Driving through Vermont, I stopped to get gas in a small town. And I saw this flyer that said, "The Blessing of the Cows." I said, "What is this?" The guy behind the stand said, "I don't know. I mean, it's something they do every year, and they do, they come out and they bless the cows to have a bountiful milk production. And, it's a festival outside of town." But it had a map on there, and well, you bet I went. And yes, I ate the ice cream of fresh milk that was just milked out of the cow. And I sat there and I did all the events because I wanted to see, what are you doing? How are you drawing these people in? And trust me, there were tons of people out there. And yeah, there was a priest out there doing the blessing of the cows and all, and got to watch that, hokey a little bit, but it drew me in. I wanted to see, what is this? This is kind of cool. Again, focus on the customer. Who is your customer? What do they want? How do they want it? Why should they buy from you? I know that you're saying it's about time, and I'm getting to the end.
All right, go ahead.
Planning is key. Every action should be deliberate and thought out, but always have the customer in mind. Your logo needs to be on everything. You are telling your story through your logo. If you don't have one, develop one. Think about agritainment, because it's at farmers markets, it's at pick your owns, it's at roadside stands. Whenever you're going anywhere, anytime, you think agritainment. Listen to your customers. They want to give you money, and they will tell you how they want it, where they want it, what they want. In conclusion, I give a quote here. It's from Sun Tzu, from a book called The Art of War, and it was written in 500 BC. And I think it sums up business planning. It says, "The general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is even fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand." So plan ahead. Everything should be deliberate. So with that, I open it up to questions that you may have.
Thanks, Blake. That was great.
Well, I know we really didn't get into restaurants. Yes, there are some tricks there. Restaurants want, they want quantity. They want the same quality. Ask them, plan ahead. Go in and talk to them before you produce. Ask them, what do you want to feature? How do you want it? And they may say, anything you want to produce, I'll buy. No, tell me talk to the chef. What do you want to feature? I had a restaurant here that doing a presentation, and the chef said, "You know what? I've always wanted to do ducks. I've always wanted to feature duck, and I've never had the opportunity." I asked producers in the room, I don't know anything about ducks, but who's willing to produce ducks? 3 hands went up, and I said, every one of y'all, including the chef, you're excused from the presentation. Go out in the hall. They're producing ducks for the restaurant now, and it's very limited supply. So, it's an exclusive meal. If you want duck, you need to get here on this day, and we've only got this many plates of it. So if you want it, you better be here early, because we run out, it's gone, and for the next 3 months. So talk to them, find out what it is that they want.
Any questions?
All
I'm
right.
not seeing any yet.
They're ready to get to lunch. They've been smelling the lunch that they had cooked for a while, and they're going, I don't want to talk about marketing anymore. I'm ready to go eat my lunch. That's the sense of urgency that they have right now.
All those good pictures of fresh veggies. It's made me hungry.
Oh, there you go.
Good marketing. All right. Well, we will dismiss for lunch. Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. It's been a lot of good information. Thank you to our speakers. Really enjoyed it. Be sure to come back, log back in at 1 for our scholarships. Get to see all those kids who have worked hard and earned a scholarship for college. And then we'll have our panel discussion at 2. So with that, we'll close it out. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on again.
Thanks.